After my collapse, I lay in a hospital bed, waiting for emergency brain surgery while snow kept falling outside the window. I called my son 6 times. Every call went straight to voicemail. Then I saw the message on my screen. This contact has blocked your number. My chest seized. He'd cut off my number 2 hours before surgeons would open my skull. Then the door to my recovery room swung open. A surgeon, white-haired and unhurried, who set a small wooden box on the table beside me, without a word. He lifted the lid, drew out a folded sheet of paper, gone yellow with age, and something stopped me cold. The handwriting was mine. 7 words I'd put down 30 years ago, and buried so deep I'd stopped knowing they existed. What that surgeon said next turned my blood to ice. I still couldn't make sense of it, not until the sentence that followed. A note worth making. Certain details here have been shaped for clarity and impact, but the weight of the lesson is real. I never pictured myself like this, stretched out in the back of an ambulance studying a paramedic's face, while my son's line rang through to nothing for the 6th time. That morning had opened the same way every morning had since the day I stopped working black tea at the kitchen table, tracking January snow as it slid down the glass of my Kensington apartment window. 1 bedroom, nothing spare. Welcome back to His Hidden Revenge. If you're just finding us, I'm glad you're here. Settle in, because this one runs deep. If you've been with me a while, tap that subscribe button so the next story comes straight to you. Before we go any further, tell me what you're up to right now. Are you driving somewhere, cooking dinner, maybe just sitting quietly at the end of a long day? I'd love to know. A quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. Enough for a man who'd spent 37 years behind the wheel on Route 23 through Philadelphia and came home too worn out to need much more. I'm Roland Hafner, 64 years old. For those 37 years, I drove that bus into every corner of this city, learned every pothole, every shortcut, every face that boarded at Washington Street and stepped off at Boylston. The job gave me patience. It taught me to smile at passengers who never bothered to smile back. What it never prepared me for was the silence that moved in after my wife Dora passed 8 years ago, or how to reach a son who'd quietly stopped calling. That morning, I sat with my tea and opened my wallet. Dora's photo was still tucked inside, faded the corners, bent and soft. Her smile from our wedding day in 1985, from a time when everything still seemed within reach. I checked my phone. 3 months since Garrett last texted. I told myself he was busy, successful. My son Garrett is 34 now. Penn Law graduate, corner office in Manhattan, the kind of man who wears his success like armor and loses track of where it was forged. I repeated that to myself every morning. The tea was still warm when I decided to grab the newspaper. I pulled on my jacket, the old navy one with the frayed cuff, and stepped out into the building hallway. Mrs. Kowalski from 2B was deep in an argument on her phone, her voice bleeding right through the walls. The radiator banged and knocked. Everything ordinary. Everything exactly as it had been through 8 years of living alone. I shouldered open the front door. The cold landed first, that deep January cold that settles into your joints and stays. Snow had been coming down since dawn, laying a thin white coat over the sidewalk that looked almost gentle. I took 3 steps toward the newspaper box on the corner. Then, the world lurched sideways, not a slow drift, not the ordinary stumble of a man losing his footing, but a violent jerk like the ground had been snatched out from under me, and my mind had no time to compensate. I reached for the railing and missed it clean. The pavement rushed up before I could do anything about it. My shoulder connected first, then my head. The newspaper box was 2 feet away and might as well have been a mile. Snow pushed through my jacket, cold, everything cold. Pain detonated behind my eyes, white-hot, absolute. Sound went thick and muffled like I'd dropped below water. I told my arms to push me up. They ignored me. Someone was calling my name. Roland, don't move. Opal Fenwick, my 71-year-old neighbor, a retired schoolteacher, appeared above me. Her face drained of color. She already had 911 on the line before I could wave her off. He's not responding. Yes, he's breathing. Roland, can you hear me? I tried to tell her I was fine. The words dissolved before they reached my lips. My mouth moved. Nothing came out. She took my hand, her fingers warm and trembling against mine. 37 years I drove that bus through whatever the weather threw at us. Never called in sick once. Never asked a soul for help. I hauled passengers through blizzards and heat waves through the grinding chaos of morning rush and the hollow quiet of late-night empty runs. Every street, every stop, every face, I knew them all. And now I couldn't get to my feet, couldn't form a word, couldn't do a single thing but lie in the snow while Opal's voice broke apart around me and sirens rose somewhere far off. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. I know because I watched Opal check her watch 3 times, murmuring, "Come on, come on, come on." They lifted me onto a gurney. The ambulance inside was harsh and bright, everything sharp-edged smelling of antiseptic and urgency. One paramedic ran an IV while the other read my vitals, methodical, quick, the kind of practice speed that told me they'd handled far worse. I found my phone inside my jacket pocket. My fingers barely cooperated, but I managed to get it unlocked. Pulled up Garrett's contact. Hit call. Ringing, voicemail. I tried again. Ringing, voicemail. The paramedic, young, maybe 30, with a steady and decent face, leaned toward me. "Sir, we need an emergency contact." I lifted my phone. My voice came out hoarse, broken. "My son. Keep trying. 3rd call, 4th, 5th. What does it mean when your only child won't pick up? When you're lying there dying and the line just keeps ringing? When the one person in the world who's supposed to care most sends you to voicemail 6 times running?" The ambulance pitched around a turn. My phone screen went blurry, whether from tears or something going wrong inside my head, I honestly couldn't say. I pressed call a 6th time. Ringing, voicemail. Jefferson University Hospital's emergency department was chaos-controlled voices tangling over each other, footsteps overlapping machines sounding off in competing rhythms. They wheeled me past curtained bays crowded with other people's crises, other people's suffering. They parked me in Bay 4. Fluorescent lights hummed above. A nurse cycled through my vitals again. Blood pressure, pulse temperature. Her expression gave nothing away. That frightened me more than anything else had. Dr. Pruitt showed up 10 minutes later, a young emergency physician, eyes carrying the weight of long shifts tablet in hand, and already full of things I didn't want to hear. He rolled a stool up beside my gurney, moved through a few screens, then settled his gaze on me with the measured calm of someone who delivers hard news for a living. "Mr. Hafner, the CT scan shows a ruptured brain aneurysm. It's serious. We need to operate within hours." Each word landed like something physical. Ruptured brain aneurysm. Without surgery, he let that hang. He didn't have to complete it. "Is there someone we can call?" I looked down at my phone. Screen read missed calls to Garrett 6. "My son?" I said, barely above a whisper. "I've been trying." Dr. Pruitt's face shifted. Something quieter moved across it. Something closer to sorrow. "Keep trying. But Mr. Hafner, do you understand what I'm telling you? Without emergency surgery, you're looking at hours, maybe a day." I understood that part. What I couldn't understand was why Garrett's phone was going straight to voicemail now. Why the nurse standing behind Dr. Pruitt was watching me the way people watch someone who is already alone. I dialed Garrett one more time, straight to voicemail. He'd switched it off. The nurse rested a hand briefly on my shoulder. "We'll keep trying, Mr. Hafner, but we need to get you prepped for surgery. Can you sign the consent forms?" "Bowasi." "MD Stoust." I looked at the paperwork she was holding out. My signature line. No witness line, no family member line. Just me lying flat on my back in a hospital bay about to have my skull opened by strangers, while my only son, somewhere in his Manhattan corner office with those floor-to-ceiling windows, had powered his phone down. I didn't know yet what Garrett was doing while I lay there. I had no idea about the calls he was placing, the arrangements already being set in motion. I only knew he wasn't answering mine. What I came to understand later through the phone records Stellan subpoenaed the voicemail timestamps and Garrett's own statements during his federal plea agreement reshaped everything. The worst pain wasn't the aneurysm. The conversations I'm about to describe were pieced together from those sources. Some I reconstructed myself. Some Garrett confirmed in the end, one blink at a time. The real wound was knowing what my son had been doing while I was dying. January 15th, 6:47 p.m. While I was signing consent forms with trembling hands, Garrett, 34 years old, Penn Law corner office in Manhattan, stood in a hotel ballroom in a tuxedo at a charity gala, black tie champagne donors with their names on hospital wings. His phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. 6th time that day. The phone records were in Stellan's file. 6 calls, 6 times my name lit up his screen, 6 times he felt that buzz and made his choice. Celeste noticed. My daughter-in-law, Celeste, 32, polished as expensive marble, leaned in close, champagne in hand. "Your father again." Garrett glanced at the screen. Dad, in white letters. He slipped the phone back into his tuxedo pocket. "He's fine," Garrett said. "He always overreacts. Always overreacts." That is what my son said about 6 calls from his dying father. The gala went until midnight. They rode an Uber back to their penthouse 32nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows above Manhattan. Garrett finally listened to the voicemail at 11:30 p.m. The timestamp was in the records. I know what I said because I remember leaving it. Voice-shaking nurse standing right beside me. "Garrett, it's Dad. I'm at Jefferson University Hospital. Brain aneurysm ruptured. Emergency surgery tomorrow morning. I just need you to call me back. Please." 16 seconds. Garrett put it on speaker. Celeste was in their granite-countered kitchen making tea. She set her mug down. "Tomorrow morning, emergency surgery." Garrett confirmed it. Celeste pulled her laptop across the island. Her fingers moved fast. 2 minutes. $1 million, she said, turning the screen toward him. "Life insurance. You're the sole beneficiary. I'd taken out that policy 30 years ago, whenever Garrett was 4. $1 million to make sure my son would be taken care of if something happened to me. Ironic. Celeste scrolled further down. Surgical complications clause. If he dies during or within 30 days of surgery, full payout, no investigation required. They looked at each other across that kitchen island. How does a father raise his son alone for 27 years, pull double shifts to cover Penn Law, show up to every graduation, and wind up worth more dead than alive? Garrett set down his scotch glass. "Where's Dad's medical file?" He kept it in his home office. I'd handed over my medical records 2 years earlier. Garrett had said he was putting together a medical power of attorney, wanted everything on file in case I ever had an emergency. A Penn Law-trained attorney asking his aging father to be responsible. It had seemed like consideration. I never questioned it. What he was actually doing was getting ready. Garrett pulled the manila folder from his filing cabinet, flipped through the pages, childhood vaccinations, college health records, decades of doctor's notes. Then he found it. Bright yellow paper, allergy alert page from 1997, bold red letters across the top. Severe reaction. Propofol. The anesthesia drug that had nearly taken my life during a routine procedure 26 years ago. My throat closed, and they'd had to intubate me on the spot. The one that every physician since had flagged in my file with yellow highlighting and red ink. That yellow page, the one declaring that propofol nearly killed me in 1997, was the only thing standing between my son and $1 million. Garrett tore it out. The perforation crackled through the quiet apartment. Clean tear. No sign it had ever existed except for a tiny scrap of paper caught on the folder's metal clasp. Celeste watched from the doorway, arms folded. "They call that a medical accident," she said softly. Garrett fed the yellow page into his shredder. The machine erased it in seconds. Midnight, now January 16th. While I lay in a hospital bed 50 miles away, terrified and alone, my son sat down at his fax machine. He sent my incomplete medical history to Jefferson University Hospital. The fax number was printed on my insurance card, the one I'd handed him for safekeeping. The hospital's fax machine confirmed receipt at 12:05 a.m., received, delivered, filed. Medical history with the allergy page gone. Records heading straight to my surgical team. Records that would tell them I carried no drug allergies. Records that would clear them to administer propofol. Then Garrett opened his phone, scrolled to contacts, found Dad. Block contact. Celeste poured 2 glasses of scotch. Good scotch. The kind that costs what I used to earn in a week. She handed one to Garrett. No toast. They just stood there in their darkened penthouse above Manhattan at 100 in the morning, drinking in silence while 50 miles north, their murder plot sat filed inside a hospital computer system. I knew none of this. What I knew was that I woke at 6 a.m. in that pre-op bed body, aching a head-splitting terror, making my hands tremble. A nurse came in, kind-faced woman, maybe 50 with worn eyes. "Mr. Hafner, we're prepping you for 8 a.m. surgery. Is there anyone we can call?" I picked up my phone and tried Garrett's number 1 final time. The message came back instantly. This contact has blocked your number. I stared at those words, read them 3 times. Couldn't make them mean anything. The nurse saw my expression. "Sir." I turned the screen toward her. My voice came out, flat emptied out. "I had a son." She rested her hand on my shoulder, said nothing. What was there to say? They wheeled me toward the OR at 7:45 a.m. Fluorescent lights swept past overhead in steady intervals. Ceiling tiles exposed pipes the mechanical rhythms of a hospital that was about to open my skull. I had no idea my son had destroyed my allergy records. No idea he'd blocked my number after faxing over an incomplete history. I thought he'd simply walked away from me. I didn't know he'd tried to have me killed. I wouldn't learn the truth until a silver-haired surgeon stepped into my pre-op room, looked at my chart, and spoke a name I hadn't heard in 30 years. But first, I had to survive the operation my son had sabotaged. The surgeon gripping that scalpel was no stranger, though I had no way of knowing it, lying unconscious on that table while he fought to keep me alive. What I came to understand later, when Dr. Stellan Waverly sat beside my hospital bed and laid it all out, was that my survival began at 6 a.m. in a surgical prep area. Stellan, 58 years old, chief of neurosurgery at Jefferson University Hospital, silver-haired with steady hands that had guided more than 2,000 brain surgeries, stood reviewing my pre-surgical file. He read the patient information aloud to his surgical resident. Standard protocol. Roland Hafner, age 64, occupation retired bus driver, Route 23, Philadelphia, retired 2020. Then he stopped, read the next line again. Route 23. That route. That winter. For 20 years, Stellan had kept searching, checked SEPTA driver records twice, filed a Freedom of Information request that went nowhere, contacted the Transit Authority 3 separate times. The driver who'd pulled him off that bench had never been identified, but Stellan had held on to 2 things: Route 23 and the name the man had given the dispatcher that night when reporting a passenger assist. Roland. Just Roland. He looked back at the name on the chart. Roland Hafner. Route 23. 30 years collapsed into a single moment. Stellan told me later that he stood frozen for 15 seconds in eternity in pre-surgical prep, staring at those 2 details. Route 23. The same route where a night driver with kind eyes had found him slumped at a bus stop in January 1993. Stellan had been 28 then, a third-year medical student. He'd worked a 36-hour shift, studying between patient rounds, running on coffee and willpower. Walking to the stop through a blizzard made it 3 blocks before his legs gave out. He'd gone down on a bench at the Route 23 stop. Hypothermic, drained, unable to get back up. The night bus had no reason to stop, no passengers waiting, but the driver spotted him, slumped there, and pulled over anyway. An older man, maybe 50. Weathered face, cheap jacket, patient eyes. The driver helped Stellan onto the bus, drove him home. Through the storm, turned down payment, and said something Stellan never stopped carrying. "You look like you're about to fall over, son. Doctors need to take care of themselves too." Stellan never learned his name. A week later, the Hanging Meal Fund, a small charity providing meals for medical residents' families in financial hardship, received an anonymous donation, $4,800. Enough to cover 6 months of expenses for Stellan's mother, who was fighting cancer and couldn't work. The attached note read, "Someone believes in you. Don't give up." Stellan had kept that note in his desk drawer for 30 years. 30 years is a long time to carry gratitude. Long enough for a face to blur, but never long enough to forget what someone did when you had nothing. Standing in that prep room at 6 a.m., with my file in his hands, Stellan understood that the man who'd rescued him 3 decades ago was about to die on his operating table if he did nothing about it. That's when Willa Garland walked in. Willa, senior surgical nurse, 20 years at Jefferson University Hospital. The one who caught what others missed, held up my medical file concern, clear on her face. "Dr. Waverly, we have a pagination issue. Page 8 is missing." Stellan looked up. Missing. Faxed records skipped pages, sometimes printer jams, fax errors, clerical slip-ups. But this patient needed a complete history before anesthesia. Something coiled tight in Stellan's gut. He'd reviewed thousands of files over his career. Pagination errors happened, but something felt off. "Get the archive records," Stellan said, voice clipped. "Original file, now." Willa didn't push back. She made the call, 6:50 a.m., 25 minutes until the scheduled surgery. The medical records clerk winded from running 3 floors, came through the prep room door, clutching an archived file from 1997. My College Health Center records. Stellan turned to page 8, bright yellow paper, bold red letters across the top. Allergy alert. Propofol. Severe anaphylactic reaction. Nearly fatal 1997. Do not administer under any circumstances. That yellow page, page 8, the one someone had ripped out and run through a shredder in a Manhattan penthouse at midnight, was the only barrier between me and death. Standard neurosurgery protocol calls for propofol during anesthesia induction. Safe, dependable, used in 90% of procedures. In my body, it would have sealed my throat in under 60 seconds. Willa went pale. Dr. Standard protocol is... I know what standard protocol is, Stellan said, his jaw set hard. Someone remove this page deliberately, switch to sevoflurane immediately, brief the entire surgical team. No propofol. Flag it in red on every monitor. The team moved fast. Anesthesia protocol overhauled, equipment reconfigured. Stellan stood alone in the prep room for 30 seconds, holding that yellow page absorbing what had nearly happened. Someone had wanted me dead on that table. Someone with access to my medical records. Someone who knew exactly which page to pull. He had no time to sit with it. Surgery was 10 minutes out. I was wheeled into operating room 7 at 8 a.m. Stellan scrubbed in hand, steady mind, locked in. The man who had once kept him alive now lay under his blade skull, about to be opened life, balanced on the edge of a single cut. 5 hours. That's what it took. Stellan worked with total precision, every movement deliberate, every call considered. The aneurysm was larger than the scans had indicated, more hazardous, more unforgiving. One wrong cut and I would bleed out, stroke, or die. He didn't make a wrong cut. 12:15 p.m. Stellan stepped back from the table, stripped off his surgical gloves, and gave his team a single nod. Closing now, vital stable. He's going to make it. Willa exhaled. The surgical resident sagged with relief. The anesthesiologist logged the time surgery complete. Stellan walked to the scrub room. Alone stood at the sink. Cold water running over his hands, eyes fixed on his own reflection in the polished steel. 30 years, full circle, a debt repaid in blood and precision. He whispered to the empty room. I owed you this, Roland Hafner. What I remember is coming back to consciousness hours later in the recovery room. Vision, swimming pain everywhere, dull, throbbing, mechanical. Breathing tube out throat, raw machines marking time in steady beeps. A silver-haired surgeon stood at my bedside. His voice was calm, professional, and carried something I couldn't identify. Mr. Hafner, you're going to be fine. I tried to answer. My mouth felt packed with cotton. Nothing came. He glanced toward the door, scanning the hallway, then brought his face closer. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, meant for no one but me. I've been waiting 30 years to see you again. I looked at him through the haze, made nothing of it, couldn't place his face, couldn't pull together a single question. He straightened, set a hand on my shoulder, warm, unhurried, the hand of a man who'd reached a decision and found peace there. Rest, he said, the clinical tone returning. We'll talk later. I didn't know what he meant. Not yet. I only knew that those 8 words carried the weight of a story. I hadn't realized I was inside. I studied his face through the blur. Something about the eyes, something just out of reach. I didn't know him, not yet. I was alive because Stellan Waverly remembered, but I didn't know that either. I didn't know about the missing page, the last-minute change in anesthesia, or that my son had engineered my death. I just knew I was breathing, staring at a surgeon whose face meant something I couldn't name, wondering why he looked at me the way you look at someone returned from the dead. 3 days later, he would tell me everything. 3 days after surgery, the silver-haired surgeon who kept me alive walked into my recovery room, carrying a small wooden box I hadn't laid eyes on in 30 years. I was awake finally. The pain had eased to something bearable, medication, softening the world's edges, keeping everything at a remove. I'd spent those 3 days trying to reach Garrett, dozens of calls all blocked, text messages that never landed, voicemails that vanished into silence. The nurses kept asking whether someone was on the way. I kept telling them my son would be here soon. By day 3, I'd stopped believing it myself. Stellan came in alone that afternoon. No residents at his heels, no clipboard, no clinical purpose. Just a man in a white coat carrying something that belonged in an attic, not a hospital corridor. He sat in the chair beside my bed without asking, and placed the box on the table between us, worn wooden hand smoothed from years of handling. I looked at it. Something old stirred. "Mr. Hafner Roland, I need to show you something." His voice had shifted. The surgeon's register was gone, replaced by something quieter, more unguarded. He opened the box with deliberate care as though what was inside could still break. Lifted out a piece of yellowed paper, folded into quarters, its edges gone soft with age, and unfolded it the way you'd handle something sacred. Held it out to me. My hand was unsteady. The paper felt thin and fragile. I read 7 words written in handwriting. I recognized my own younger, more sure of itself. "Someone believes in you. Don't give up." My throat locked. "Where did you get this?" My voice came out hoarse, roughened by the breathing tube. Stellan leaned back and hands settled in his lap. "In January 1993, you were running the last Route 23 trip of the night. Do you remember?" I stared at the note, tried to push back through 30 years. "There was a kid," I said slowly, "at the bus stop, late, freezing." "That was me," Stellan said. "I was 28, third-year medical student. I'd just finished a 36-hour shift at this hospital. Walked out into a blizzard because I couldn't afford a cab. Made it 3 blocks before I went down at your stop." The memory climbed back sharper now. A figure folded over on the bench coat, far too light for a Philadelphia winter, shaking hard enough to see from the driver's seat. I'd pulled over. Wasn't procedure, no waiting passenger, no scheduled stop. But the kid looked more than half gone. "You were hypothermic," I said it coming back to me. "Barely conscious," Stellan confirmed. "You got me on the bus, drove me home. I was rambling, talking about quitting, about my mother, about not being able to keep up with tuition and rent at the same time. You didn't say much, just drove." I remembered that too. The kid's exhausted, desperate honesty. The kind that only surfaces when a person has nothing left to spend on pretending. "You said, 'You look like you need help, son,'" Stellan continued. "Then you got me to my apartment, made sure I was inside, and drove away. I never got your name. How do you measure the weight of $4,800? The selling price of a used car. 8 more months with your mother. The distance between walking away and becoming a surgeon." A week later, Stellan said, his voice dropping, "The Hanging Meal Fund, a small charity that helped medical residents' families, received a donation. $4,800. Exact price of a 1987 Oldsmobile, earmarked specifically for a medical student's mother's cancer treatment." My chest pulled tight. "My mother was dying," Stellan said. "Stage 4 lung cancer, no insurance, no savings, chemotherapy she couldn't pay for. That donation bought her 8 more months of treatment. 8 months we would never have had. 8 months I got to say goodbye." He reached into the box again, produced a receipt, faded barely there. "Vehicle sale. 1987 Oldsmobile. $4,800. I found this years later when I started searching," Stellan said. "Cross-referenced the donation date with vehicle sales in Kensington. Your name came up. Route 23 bus driver. Sold his only car the week after pulling a hypothermic medical student off a bench. I remembered selling that Oldsmobile, my only vehicle. 37 years old, ran rough, but it ran. I'd needed it getting to the depot before dawn, getting home well after dark. Without it, I walked. 2 months of walking Route 23 before I'd put enough aside for another car. Dora had asked where it went. I told her it had broken down, not worth the repair bill. The lie sat lighter than admitting I'd given away our only car to a stranger I'd never see again. I sold that car thinking it was just one decent act in a life full of small ones. How was I supposed to know the kid I'd carried home through a blizzard would be the man holding my life in his hands 30 years on? "You saved my life, Roland," Stellan said. His voice was steady, but the weight in it had been building for 3 decades. "That note, I've read it every time I wanted to stop. Every impossible shift, every doubt, every moment I thought I couldn't go on. Someone believes in you. Don't give up." He set the note back inside the box, closed the lid, and looked at me straight. "When I saw your name on that surgical file 3 days ago, Route 23, I knew it had to be you. 30 years, and I finally got to give back what you gave me." I couldn't get words out. My throat was too full. Tears I couldn't hold moved down my face. Stellan's expression changed. Something harder moved into his eyes. "But someone tried to kill you in my operating room. The words hit like cold water poured over me. Roland, your medical file, the one faxed to this hospital the night before surgery was missing, page 8. Your propofol allergy. The one that nearly took your life in 1997. The one that should be flagged in red on every record you own. I stopped breathing. If I hadn't recognized your name, Stellan continued, voice flat and deliberate now. If I hadn't called for the archive file, if I hadn't caught that missing page, you would have died on my table. Throat sealed shut. Anaphylactic shock, brain damage within minutes. They would have logged it as a tragic surgical complication. He leaned in. The fax came from a Manhattan number. The page was pulled between your son's last call to you and my scheduled surgery time. Deliberate, precise. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were removing. Stellan's voice went quieter, more measured. Roland, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Who had access to your propofol allergy records? I already knew the answer. I just couldn't make myself say it. When I reached for my phone to call Garrett to ask him the question I dreaded having answered, my hands were shaking so badly, Stellan had to hold them steady. My son, I said. My voice came out hollow, scraped clean. Gar had my medical records. I handed them over 2 years ago. He said it was for safekeeping. Stellan's expression didn't move. He'd already known. Call him, he said quietly. Ask him why he hasn't come. Listen to what he says. I lifted my phone. January 20th, late afternoon, 4 days since surgery. 4 days of nothing from the only family I had left. I dialed Garrett's number. The screen blinked. This contact has blocked your number. I read it again. Tried a second time. Same message. Cold. Automated. Final. Third time. Fourth time. Each attempt returned the same mechanical rejection. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the hospital blanket. My son had blocked me. Not after surgery, not during recovery. Before. Stellan picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and set it back on the bedside table without a word. Willa came in. I realized she'd been standing in the hallway waiting for this moment. She moved to my bedside with that careful nurse expression that signals difficult news. Mr. Hafner, she said quietly. I reviewed the emergency contact log this morning, hospital policy. I held her gaze and waited. Your son blocked your number at 6 a.m. on January 16th, 2 hours before your surgery was scheduled. 2 hours. He'd blocked me 2 hours before they opened my skull. 2 hours before I might not have come off that table. 2 hours after faxing the incomplete records designed to make sure I didn't. Stellan stood in the doorway. His face said he already knew. Had known since he'd looked at the records himself. There is a moment when you stop being someone's father and become their judge. I felt it happening, felt the shift from love to something colder and more necessary, a change I had never wanted and could not stop. Willa left without a sound. Stellan closed the door and settled into the chair beside my bed like we were in no hurry. He drew a file folder from inside his coat, opened it across his lap, and produced a single page. Fax transmission log, he said. His voice had flattened out. Origin number traced to Manhattan. Zip code 10065, Upper East Side. Transmitted at 11:58 p.m. January 15th. Hospital received it at 12:03 a.m. January 16th. He turned the paper toward me. Numbers, timestamps, routing codes that meant nothing except proof. Missing page 8, your propofol allergy. 6 hours later, your son blocked your number. 6 hours after that, you were on my table with an anesthesia protocol that would have killed you if I hadn't caught the gap. Stellan leaned forward. Roland, someone in Manhattan, someone who had your complete medical file, deliberately removed the one page that stood between you and death, then cut off your number so you couldn't reach anyone when complications set in. This wasn't a mistake. This was attempted murder. I couldn't speak, could barely draw breath. The room felt like it was shrinking around me, the air going thin. I have a plan, Stellan said. If you're willing. I looked at him and waited. I'll call Garrett from my personal phone. Report post-surgical complications, paralysis from the waist down, severe cognitive decline, early-stage dementia. Tell him you need round-the-clock private care and invite him to my estate on Cape May, New Jersey. Ocean views, complete privacy, everything he'd expect for a recovering father. How do you lay a trap for your own son? How do you lie motionless, feigning paralysis and confusion, while cameras record him, deciding whether you're more useful alive or dead? The house has security cameras throughout, Stellan went on. Legally compliant in New Jersey, proper notice posted at every entrance. He'll see the warnings when he arrives, he'll ignore them. Assume they're standard security fixtures. The healthcare proxy allows him to make medical decisions. We'll observe what he does when he believes you're helpless. He produced another document. Legal letterhead. My attorney is already briefed. We document everything. If Garrett is genuinely concerned, acts like a son shows up like a son, then maybe the block number was grief or panic, something that still has an explanation. But if he tries to finish what he started, I finished it for him. Stellan nodded. If he shows financial interest in your death, if he raises life insurance, if he makes any move to harm you or speed up your decline, it's on camera. We have proof. We take it to the FBI. I sat there holding the fax transmission log as though it were evidence at trial. The paper felt thin and weightless, like it should be heavier for everything it proved. Memories came without warning. Garrett at 7, crying into my shirt at Dora's funeral, small hands clutching the fabric. Don't leave me too, Dad. I'd promised I never would. Garrett at his Penn Law graduation, cap and gown, a smile so wide it barely fit his face. We did it, Dad, you and me. I'd wept and hadn't cared who saw. Garrett 3 months ago, voice distant, distracted. I'll call you back, Dad. Busy week. He never called back. The son who became a stranger, the stranger who wanted me dead. What if he's innocent? My voice broke on the word. What if there's an explanation? Stellan's answer came like a scalpel, clean and direct. Then there's nothing to find. But you already know he's not. I did know. The evidence was all there. The block number, the missing page, the timing, too precise to be anything but deliberate. But knowing and accepting are different things. Knowing is a thought. Accepting is the moment you agree to bait a trap for your son to prove he wants you in the ground. I gave a single nod, barely visible. Stellan stood and made a call. The estate sat at the end of a private drive with no neighboring houses in sight. 3 stories of gray stone above the Atlantic. Stellan told me later the security system had been in place for years. His late wife had insisted on it after a break-in at a property nearby. He'd simply switched the cameras on and posted the required notices. 3 days had been enough for that. He ended the call and looked at me. If your son is innocent, there's no trap, only the truth. If he's guilty, we'll have proof before he can come at you again. But we both knew which truth we were going to find. As Stellan moved toward the door, he turned back one last time. Roland, when this is over, when you see what he does and hear what he says, you need to be prepared for it. I believed I was. I thought I'd already made peace with the worst of it. But I had no idea what cameras in the dark would show me, about the son I'd raised alone for 27 years. I didn't know that some betrayals run deep enough to rewrite everything you believed about love and family and who you'd been. 3 days later, Cobb drove me to the ferry terminal. The crossing to Cape May, New Jersey moved through gray January water, carrying me toward a house where cameras would watch my son weigh the value of my life. 3 days had gone by since I'd agreed to Stellan's plan. 3 days of physical therapy to build strength I'd be performing not to have. 3 days of practicing blank stares into hospital mirrors. Cobb Averett, 49 years old, former police officer turned private investigator brought in by Stellan for security, drove me from the ferry terminal. We moved through Cape May Courthouse on empty winter roads past shuttered tourist shops and stripped bare trees toward the isolated northeast shore. The villa materialized at the end of a private drive with nothing else around it. 3 stories of gray stone facing the ocean, gardens gone dormant. Stone walls tracing the property lines, the kind of place where you could cry out and only the water would hear. Stellan met us at the front entrance. Before I stepped inside, he spoke plainly formally. This property has security cameras throughout all common areas. Posted notices are displayed at each entrance. New Jersey law requires I inform you that surveillance is in effect. Legally announced everything that happened here would be captured on record with full consent. Cobb helped me inside. My legs were weak but functional. I'd have to remember to let them fail tomorrow. The guest room was on the first floor, larger than my entire Kensington apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the ocean, a fireplace, a hospital bed, already set up complete with monitors and an IV stand. Stellan placed the wooden box on my nightstand beside the medical equipment. The same box from 1993, the one holding the note I'd written to a hypothermic medical student 30 years ago. Now it sat here keeping watch over what was coming. 30 years, I said. From that box to this. Stellan nodded. Full circle? The box sat on the nightstand like a gavel, witness to what I'd once given, witness to what I was about to learn. That evening, Stellan walked me through the performance. Eyes half open, he instructed. Don't track movement, mouth slightly slack. When someone says your name, no response. If you must speak, only confused fragments. Where am I? Dora, your wife's name. Nothing coherent. Willa had come to help. She adjusted my arm, letting it drop naturally against the mattress. Paralyzed limbs don't hold their position, she explained. They fall, dead weight, no resistance. I looked at myself in the mirror, eyes glazed, jaw loose, body gone slack. I looked like my father in his final week. The sight turned my stomach. Good, Stellan said. That's exactly what we need. I was about to perform paralysis for my own son, to lie completely still while he made his calculation about what I was worth. What kind of father builds this trap? What kind of son makes it necessary? That night, I hardly slept. I woke at dawn on January 23rd and watched the sunrise spread across the Atlantic through those wide windows. Orange light on gray water the last morning before Garrett learned his father couldn't move. Cobb brought breakfast on a tray, set it down in silence. He knew what the day held. Stellan appeared in my doorway at 7. Ready? I nodded, though I wasn't, and never would be. Remember, Stellan said, for the 10th time. If he's innocent, this ends today. If he shows concern, genuine worry acts like a son. Should we find the whole thing was a mistake, we apologize. We move on. But we both understood that wasn't going to happen. The call was set for 2 p.m. Stellan wanted to give Garrett time to think, to confer with Celeste, to let their strategy and private calculations bleed through in whatever slipped out later. I spent the morning watching the ocean, counting waves, trying not to think about what Garrett's voice would sound like the moment he learned his father was helpless. 2 p.m. came both too fast and too slow. Stellan went to his private office, leaving the door open so I could hear from the sitting room next to it. He dialed from his personal cell. No hospital line, no official record, nothing that would turn up on institutional logs. The phone rang twice. Garrett picked up his voice, coming through clear and professional. Hello, Mr. Hafner. This is Dr. Stellan Waverly from Jefferson University Hospital. We need to discuss your father's condition. Silence. 1 second. 2. What's wrong? Garrett's voice held steady, not panicked, not breaking. Stellan's tone was professionally grave. Your father experienced complications from surgery, paralysis from the waist down, severe cognitive impairment. We're seeing signs of early-stage dementia, possibly accelerated by the surgical trauma. I've moved him to my private estate on Cape May, New Jersey, for specialized care. I sat in the next room, holding my breath, listening to my son's voice float through the open door. Another pause longer this time. Then Garrett spoke. What's the address? Not how is he, not can I talk to him, not what are his chances, just what's the address. 4 words that told me everything. Stellan supplied the information without losing his calm. He's stable, but he'll require round-the-clock attention. I'm happy to go through the medical details when you arrive. I'll be there tomorrow, Garrett said. My wife and I will take the morning ferry. Of course, I'll have everything ready. Stellan ended the call and sat in silence for 30 seconds. Then he walked into the sitting room where I hadn't moved. We didn't speak. What was there to say? That single question, what's the address, had said it all. A son who loved his father would have asked about treatment, about prognosis, about whether he was in pain. A son who was planning his father's death needed to know where the body was. Stellan settled into the chair across from me. He'll come, he said. Tomorrow, I'd guess. I stared out at the ocean waves breaking against the rocks below, gray water reaching all the way to the horizon. Tomorrow, my son would walk through that door. Tomorrow, I'd lie still as death, while his real face showed itself. Tomorrow they come, I thought. Tomorrow we'll know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark watching the small camera light blink red in the corner. A tiny LED marking the lens position, recording nothing yet, just waiting. Waves crashed against the rocks. The sound was rhythmic, eternal, indifferent. I thought about Garrett as a child, 7 years old, at Dora's funeral, crying into my shirt. Don't leave me too, Dad. I had promised I never would. I thought about his Penn Law graduation, his smile so wide it hurt to look at. I thought about the last 3 months of silence, the blocked number, the missing allergy page. The son I'd raised alone for 27 years was coming to see whether his paralyzed, demented father was ready to die. I believed I was prepared for whatever those cameras would show me. I was wrong. They arrived on the morning ferry with Toomey luggage and carefully rehearsed expressions of grief that looked like something lifted from a soap opera. I heard them before I ever saw them. Cobb opened the villa door at 10 a.m., and Garrett's voice carried from the foyer. "Dr. Waverly, thank you for reaching out. I came as soon as I could." I lay in the hospital bed, eyes half closed, mouth slightly slack, the performance Stellan had walked me through. Dead weight, no tracking, no reaction. Garrett entered first. Expensive suit wrinkled as though he'd slept in it. 3-day stubble. Red-rimmed eyes, everything calibrated to project a son who'd dropped everything and rushed to his dying father's side. Celeste followed in a simple black dress the first time I'd seen her, without designer labels, minimal makeup. A grief costume chosen with care. Stellan guided them to my room. "Come see for yourself." Garrett moved quickly to my bedside and took my hand, gentle, concerned, theatrical. "Dad?" His voice broke right on cue. "I'm here now. I'm so sorry I couldn't get here sooner." Through the slits of my eyelids, I watched him cry. Real tears. Practiced tears. His hand held mine the way you'd hold a parcel necessary contact, no warmth behind it. I had raised him alone, fed him, clothed him, driven him to every practice paid for Penn Law by selling everything I owned. And he stood at my bedside, shedding rehearsed tears, while his wife sized up the furniture. Celeste didn't come near the bed. She stood back, eyes moving across the room, not at me, at everything surrounding me. Fireplace, antique mahogany, ocean view, medical equipment, artwork on the walls. She drifted toward the window, dragged a finger along the frame, glanced at the paintings. Stellan watched her watching, capturing every movement, every small calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't checking on me. She was taking inventory. "The paralysis is complete from the waist down," Stellan explained. "Cognitive function is severely impaired. There are moments of lucidity, but mostly confusion. Memory loss." Garrett squeezed my hand. "Stage direction concerned, son. Is there any hope of recovery?" "Unlikely," Stellan said. "At his age with this level of trauma, we're looking at long-term care, possibly years." How do you lie still when your son's hand holds yours with all the warmth of a businessman at a stranger's funeral, when you know the tears are real, but the grief behind them is false? You remember the training, eyes unfocused, breathing steady, no reaction. Stellan's voice cut through with deliberate precision. "I should mention that this property has security cameras throughout all common areas. Notices are posted at every entrance for everyone's safety and for legal protection." Garrett's expression shifted. The grief dissolved the way stage makeup does under heat, replaced by lawyer's assessment. "Of course, standard for estates like this." His tone went professional. "Dr. Waverly, we should discuss my father's legal status, medical power of attorney care decisions, who holds authority to make medical representation." There it was, the real reason he'd come. "We can go over all of that privately," Stellan said. "Let's give your father some rest first." He guided them out. Footsteps faded toward the living room. I lay still listening. The walls were thin. Celeste's whisper carried. "Garrett, forget the insurance. Look at this house. Look at everything." A pause. Garrett's response too quiet to make out. "He doesn't have children. Stellan doesn't have children. If we play this right, stay close, help with the care, make ourselves indispensable." My hand clenched the blanket under the covers. "This is bigger," Celeste continued. "Much bigger than $1 million. This is generational wealth, oceanfront estate." Garrett murmured agreement. "We stay. We don't leave. We become family to both of them. And when the time comes..." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I understood. They'd left Plan A behind. Killing me for the insurance was too small. Plan B was sharper. Infiltrate Stellan's life. Position themselves as devoted family. Wait and watch. Find the openings. Target upgraded from my 1 million to Stellan's entire estate. Through the wall, Stellan's voice answered with perfect composure. "Of course, family involvement is essential in situations like this. I appreciate your willingness to be present." He was feeding them rope, letting them climb, recording every word. I lay there paralyzed, truly paralyzed, now not by the performance, but by what I understood. They had already moved past killing me. I was merely the entry point, the excuse, the vulnerability that had gotten them through Stellan's door. Stellan had anticipated this. That was the reason for the cameras, for the elaborate setup. He had known they wouldn't stop at me. A man who tries to murder his own father for an insurance payout doesn't suddenly grow a conscience. He finds a better target. And Stellan, accomplished neurosurgeon, oceanfront estate, no wife, no children, best friend, who just become a paralyzed dependent, was a perfect one. The conversation carried on. Garrett's lawyer voice laying groundwork, care arrangements, visitation schedules, medical updates. Celeste's softer interjections. We want to help however we can. Family should be together during times like this. Family. The word landed like acid. I had been their family once before I was worth more as an insurance policy. Before I became a doorway into a wealthier man's life. Footsteps approached. I smoothed my face back to slack emptiness. Garrett appeared in the doorway and studied me for 5 seconds. His expression in the moment, he believed no one was watching. Not grief, not love. Calculation. Then he walked away. The trap I had agreed to was bigger than I'd understood going in. I thought we were catching a son who tried to kill his father. We were catching something worse, a predator who had already moved on to the next victim, who read kindness as weakness and saw a helping hand as opportunity. Somewhere in this villa, cameras were capturing every word, every whispered plan, every manufactured tear. Stellan had built a perfect legal snare, announced cameras, posted notices, full consent, everything on record. And Garrett and Celeste had walked straight into it, already plotting their next crime. Through the wall, I heard Celeste whisper, "Forget the insurance. Look at this house." That next morning, Garrett loaded Stellan's medical certificate into his briefcase and drove out to meet an attorney, his mind already fixed on what he intended to walk away owning. Every dollar I had. I didn't know any of this while it was happening. Stellan filled me in that night after Garrett came back through the villa door, clutching a folder of papers and wearing a smile that turned my stomach. But I'm running ahead of the story. Or January 25th, 9 a.m. Across a desk in Cape May Courthouse sat Alistair Quimby, estate attorney, Cape May, New Jersey. Somewhere in his 50s, a quiet one-man shop. Quimby saw healthcare proxy filings maybe 3 or 4 times in a given year. Nothing about this appointment raised a flag. Garrett delivered his story with practiced grief. His father had come through surgery badly paralyzed below the waist, severe dementia, no capacity for his own decisions, in urgent need of a medical representative. Out came Stellan's certificate. Quimby studied it. "This is from Dr. Stellan, Waverly Jefferson University Hospital, Chief of Neurosurgery." Garrett nodded. "Dr. Waverly has been extraordinarily generous, opening his own home for my father's specialized recovery. And the reason I need medical authority, my father's condition demands decisions that cannot be deferred. Medications, treatment plans, placement questions. He has no one else. I'm his only child." Quimby read it a second time. "Signature authentic diagnosis, unambiguous severe cognitive impairment, no capacity for informed decision-making representative for care planning required. 3 days old, signed, notarized, airtight." There sat my son, grief painted across his face, inking documents that would one day bring him down. 2 paths, Quimby explained. Full guardianship, months of court dates, psychiatric assessments, family notifications, thorough but slow. Garrett leaned forward. "The faster option, healthcare proxy backed by a physician's certificate of incapacity like the one you're holding. We petitioned for temporary medical representation, 30 days renewable, covering medical decisions, care, placement, healthcare, billing. Much faster." "How fast?" 2 days, maybe less, Quimby said. "Judge Whitmore handles emergency proxy requests. He moves quickly on these." Garrett's face shifted. Stellan described it to me later, the grieving son mask peeling back to reveal something colder underneath. Something that recognized an opening. The proxy. I need it as soon as possible. Quimby reached for his forms. "I want to be clear, healthcare proxy addresses medical matters only. No authority over property or general finances. Strictly medical. Does that meet your needs?" "That's exactly what I need," Garrett said. He had no idea that medical authority was the precise instrument Stellan had always intended him to hold. Every choice logged, every step, traceable, every crooked act carried out under the official seal of my healthcare representative. 30 days of documented authority. My son believed he was seizing control. He was knotting a rope around his own neck. Quimby read Stellan's language aloud while completing the petition. Patient demonstrates severe cognitive impairment, incapable of informed medical decisions. Representative for care planning required. Garrett nodded solemnly. That describes him exactly. It's heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. That word, Stellan repeated it to me later, each syllable measured with contempt. You're the next of kin, Quimby confirmed. Only child, no other family. Quimby assembled the petition. He laid out the scope: medical decisions, care placement, medical record access, healthcare billing authority, 30-day initial term, renewable upon continued physician certification. Garrett signed every line Quimby indicated. I'll file this afternoon, Quimby told him. Judge Whitmore reviews these each day. Approval by tomorrow. They shook hands. Garrett walked out. Stellan had engineered all of it. The certificate looked legitimate because it was, I genuinely needed medical care after surgery. The proxy seemed reasonable because for real medical situations it was reasonable. But in Garrett's hands it would function as a weapon, and every swing of it would be recorded. January 26th, 2 p.m. Quimby rang the villa. Mr. Hafner, good news. Judge Whitmore has approved your healthcare proxy petition. Effective immediately 30-day term. Garrett's grip tightened on the phone. So, I have authority now. Correct, you're your father's legally designated healthcare representative. Medical decisions, treatment authorizations, record access billing, all within your scope. Document everything as representative, not in a personal capacity. The court requires accountability. Of course. Thank you. Garrett set the phone down. He turned to Celeste, who had been watching from the villa's living room. Stellan told me Garrett's face broke into the first genuine smile he'd seen from him since they'd arrived. Done, Garrett said. We have rights over Dad's property now. Celeste moved closer. All of it. Medical authority gives us access records, billing, placement decisions. Enough to begin. Begin what? The smile widened. Whatever becomes necessary. A healthcare representative holds broad discretion over medical matters. Treatments, records, billing, all mine to direct. Care placement, too. A pause. And once I'm established in that role, petitioning for financial conservatorship is the natural next move. That takes care of everything else. What they couldn't know, what Stellan had made certain they wouldn't know, was that every action Garrett took beneath that representative title was being cataloged. Every fraudulent choice, every crime executed under the authority of that proxy would trace back to him without ambiguity. Stellan had built this from the start. The proxy wasn't leverage. It was a paper trail. A rope fed out one documented act at a time. That evening, while Garrett and Celeste dined in the villa's formal dining room, Stellan slipped into my room, drew the door shut, spoke low. He got the healthcare proxy. Judge approved it this afternoon. I held still, keeping up the pretense, but Stellan's hand on my shoulder told me he knew I was with him. Every choice Garrett makes from here. Every act as your healthcare representative is documented evidence. Court-appointed authority means court-level accountability. Fraud through that proxy isn't simple theft. It's breach of fiduciary duty, a federal offense. Stellan's voice held quiet, settled satisfaction. The trap is working, Roland. Now we wait and watch. He left me to my thoughts and the camera's blinking red eye. Garrett believed he'd locked down control access authority dominion over my life. What he'd actually secured was a legal instrument that would convert every crime into certified proof, a position of trust that would make every betrayal a federal offense. Stellan had handed him precisely enough rope. Done, Garrett told Celeste. We have rights over Dad's property now. He had no idea that every document he'd just signed, every word he'd spoken to that attorney, was another stone in the case Stellan was building. The proxy wasn't a tool for taking. It was a confession accumulating pages. And with morning, Garrett would begin using it. Day 3. I lay with eyes barely parted, watching Celeste pace the living room alone with her phone. Garrett had taken the early ferry, a Philadelphia meeting, something about a partner call. The moment the boat left the dock, her performance ended. January 27th, 9 a.m. The goodbye at the front door, Garrett's voice carrying its familiar note of concern. Back by 6. Anything changes with Dad, call me. Celeste matched him perfectly, a wife, holding herself steady. Drive safe. I'll keep watch over him. A kiss. The door clicked shut. The engine faded down the drive. I tracked her through barely open lids as she crossed to the window and stood there waiting until his car rounded the bend and vanished. Then her face let go. The worried wife dissolved. What surfaced was cold and deliberate, predatory. She glanced at the ceiling camera, the one Stellan had pointedly named aloud when they had arrived, the one everyone knew was recording, and gave a small, almost indifferent shrug, as if the footage was irrelevant, as if whatever came next being watched was no complication at all. That shrug frightened me more than almost anything. It still does. She opened her phone, settled at the living room desk door, wide so sound carried to my bed, and dialed. Her voice wasn't a worried wife's. It was polished, practiced, institutional. "Thank you for calling Secure Life Insurance. How may I direct your call? Automated routing." Then a live person. "This is Jessica Hartman, legal assistant to Mr. Garrett Hafner, healthcare representative for Roland Hafner." Jessica Hartman. A name conjured from nothing. "I need to add supplemental accident coverage to Mr. Hafner's policy." The representative came back measured procedural. "I'll need documentation of representative authority and beneficiary information." Celeste's voice stayed smooth. Of course. She read out the proxy number Garrett had received 2 days before. My social security number, my date of birth. Beneficiary Garrett Hafner, son and acting healthcare representative. Coverage $500,000 for accidental death. $500,000 accidental death. She was dictating the terms of my killing, and I lay 20 feet away with my eyes shut, pretending I couldn't hear. The rep asked for identity verification. Celeste was already moving. "I'm uploading now." She pulled something up on her phone. I learned afterward it was my driver's license. Garrett had photographed it at the hospital while I was still unconscious. For safekeeping, he'd said. He meant for exactly this. Representative authority covers medical and care-related insurance. Celeste said, her tone practiced and certain. The rep confirmed. "Processing now. Approval within 24 hours. Premium drawn from the account on file. Perfect. Thank you." The call ended. Celeste sat motionless for 10 seconds, eyes on her phone. Then she rose. I couldn't follow her with my eyes, but I tracked her by sound footsteps crossing the floor, reaching the staircase. The mahogany steps. 19 of them, climbing to the second floor. We're about to reach the moment I learned the full weight of what had been quietly moving against me and what someone I loved had been willing to do to get there. Before we do, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that a person you trusted completely had been working against you from the inside, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait, gather everything, and let the truth do the work? Those mahogany steps, all 19 of them, had registered the first day Cobb walked me through the house. Old-fashioned, elegant, dangerous. Now I lay listening to her climb them, slow, deliberate. She paused midway, and then came a sound I recognized, fingers gripping the railing, pressing, testing its solidity. I knew exactly what she was looking at. The wheelchair Stellan kept beside my bed. Then her feet came back down. She stopped at the bottom. Silence after that. I didn't move. Not the practiced stillness of the performance, something deeper. Genuine dread, locking every muscle. I didn't know yet what conclusion she was drawing, but I knew what it sounded like. It sounded like arithmetic, like an ending being sketched out. Tragic accident. A paralyzed man loses control of his wheelchair at the top of the stairs. The devoted healthcare representative gutted with grief. $500,000 policy releases. My fingers found the blanket and clenched until the knuckles drained white. The only motion I let myself make. Garrett was hours away still. Hours alone with her. Stellan was in his study, Cobb somewhere out on the grounds. But right then in that foyer, Celeste was standing there calculating how to kill me. No voice, no movement, no permission to break cover. The trap required me to be the bait. Her footsteps eventually retreated toward the living room. A chair, a laptop clicking open. I lay still until the shaking left my hands. Garrett came back at 6. Normal hello. Normal evening sounds of dinner. Celeste's devoted wife expression fitted back on, seamless and practiced. 7 o'clock. Stellan appeared in my doorway. "Can I check your vitals?" Our signal private conversation needed. He shut the door, set his laptop on the bedside table, sat close. "Watch this." It happened while Garrett was out. He hit play. Camera 1, living room. Celeste at the desk, phone pressed to her ear, audio crystal clear. "This is Jessica Hartman, legal assistant to Mr. Garrett Hafner." On screen, she forged the insurance policy. The way she said $500,000, no more weight behind it than reciting a phone number. Then she uploaded my ID straight from Garrett's phone. Camera 2, the foyer. Celeste at the foot of the stairs, walking up. Hand on the railing, pressing checking, back down. Then she positioned herself in the precise spot where a wheelchair would sit and just assessed. Her expression never changed. The face of someone engineering a controlled collapse. Stellan closed the laptop. Silence between us. "We have her," he said finally. Flat. Clinical. Insurance fraud, forged representative authority conspiracy to commit murder. All of it, captured with full legal consent. I stared at the ceiling. "She'll move tomorrow or the day after," Stellan continued. "Policy approval is still pending, but the fraud is already on record. We have enough to bring her in." He paused. "Except we can't. Not yet. We need Garrett documented too, his involvement, what he knew. Without that, he claims ignorance and walks." I understood. Stay paralyzed, stay exposed, stay useful as a target. Roland, hold the character. Stay in that bed. Let her believe she has you. I will not let her hurt you. Stellan leaned in. "Cobb shadows you. 10 feet, no more. The moment she moves you anywhere near those stairs, he's in the room. Forget the footage. I won't let her kill you for a recording." I gave the smallest nod. Stellan stood, looked at me. "Tomorrow or the next day she makes her move. When she does, we'll have everything. Both of them. Complete documentation." He left. I lay in the dark watching the camera's small red light pulse. That night Stellan had shown me all of it. My daughter-in-law on screen mapping out my death. She'd walked that staircase the way a demolition crew surveys a structure before bringing it down. Tested the railing, worked out the angles, placed herself exactly where they'd find the wheelchair at the bottom. Tomorrow or the next day she would stop rehearsing. Stellan would keep me alive, but I had to stay flat, stay vulnerable, stay bait until we caught them both on record. The trap only worked if I held still while she chose her moment. The following evening, formal dinner. First time all of us had gathered at the same table, staged like a production where everyone had memorized their lines, except the audience had no idea how many performers were lying. January 29th, 7 p.m. Stellan's dining room faced the ocean-black winter water, invisible beyond the glass. Crystal chandelier, antique furnishings, oil paintings worth more than I'd made across a career. They wheeled me to my place in the hospital chair, bib at my chin. Jaw loose, eyes unfocused, drool placed carefully at the corner of my mouth. Garrett wore a blazer, Celeste a silk blouse, both dressed for the occasion, both in character. Stellan took the head of the table, genial host. Cobb moved through the room, serving quiet and unhurried, his firearm holstered beneath the jacket. All 4 of us costumed. Grieving son, solicitous wife, generous physician, ruined father. 4 separate performances. 1 stage. Stellan opened. A family dinner felt right even with Roland. The way he is being together still matters. Garrett rested a hand on my shoulder. Tender, genuine maybe, which somehow made it worse. He'd have loved this view. The ocean was the one thing he never got around to. I held the act, slack and absent. Garrett carried the table. Stellan's generosity, the property's beauty, the level of care. "Dr. Waverly, there's really no way to thank you adequately. What you've given my father, the setting the attention, he's in the best possible hands." He cut my food into manageable pieces. Braised fish, soft vegetables, easy enough for someone with no coordination, then raised the fork to my mouth like feeding a small child. I opened, chewed, swallowed. Nothing behind the eyes. "Look at that," Garrett said, turning to Stellan. "He's responding to the routine. Progress, right?" Stellan nodded. "And small improvements. We take what we can get." So there I sat, bib under my chin, my son feeding me bite by bite, praising the doctor I'd rescued 3 decades back. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law was quietly inventorying the walls. Celeste spoke less than Garrett. She observed more. Her gaze moved around the room. Crystal chandelier, hand-carved molding a sideboard, with no business being younger than 200 years. The paintings. Dr. Waverly. Casual, unhurried. "This collection is extraordinary. Is that a Wyeth above the sideboard?" Stellan glanced over. "It is. My wife spent years assembling all of this. She had a remarkable eye." "It must be worth," Celeste pulled up short, recovered. "I mean, it's beautiful. She clearly cherished it." Stellan's smile gave nothing away. I've never had any of it appraised. The sentimental value is enough for me. Every word a performance. He knew the figure precisely, and he knew exactly what Celeste was doing with that question. Garrett looped back to gratitude. How fortunate, how generous, how well I was looked after. I chewed what arrived, swallowed, when Fed stared at nothing. 7:45. Celeste reached for her wine. Her napkin slipped from her lap. She dipped below the table's edge to retrieve it, then came back up, and for 2 full seconds our eyes were at the same level. Direct contact. My eyes, meant to be hollow and absent, looked straight into hers, alert, watching. 2 seconds. That was the entire window. 2 seconds, and she saw straight through it, past the drool, past the emptiness. She saw me looking back. I watched it register, pupils widening, color draining from her face. She stopped mid-rise, the napkin shaking in her hand. By the time she sat upright, I was back to blank, drooling, gone. But she'd seen it. She settled slowly, eyes returning to me. I gave her nothing, loose mouth, vacant stare, but unease had gotten into her. She wasn't sure anymore. Stellan caught it. One glance between the two of us. He understood. Garrett kept talking, oblivious something about scheduling and routines. Celeste's hand closed on his arm. I'm not well. The ferry this morning, I think it's caught up with me. I need to go up. Garrett stopped. What's wrong? I just need to lie down. She needed out, away from my eyes. Stellan rose. Of course these gatherings take more than you'd expect. Garrett, take her up. Rest matters. Dinner ended, Garrett walked her out. She looked back once from the doorway, suspicious, recalculating. Stellan wheeled me to my room and closed the door. Quiet. She knows, I whispered. My voice came out rough from hours of silence. She saw my eyes, 2 seconds, but that was enough. Stellan stood thinking. How long did she actually see? 2 seconds, maybe less, but she registered it. Then it's done. His jaw tightened. She tells Garrett tonight. By morning, they either run or they move on you. I'm accelerating. What's the plan? He pulled the chair close, kept his voice low. Tomorrow morning, I put an investment in front of Garrett. Private neurology clinics, 5 states, projected 340% return over 4 years. Minimum entry, $800,000. I looked at him. Garrett doesn't have that. No, but you do. Your house valued at $320,000, he'll have to mortgage it without your knowledge using the healthcare proxy. Federal fraud caught on camera. The trap had shifted into a higher gear. And if Celeste goes for the stairs first? Stellan's face went hard. Cobb stays in this room tonight, armed. If she comes through that door with any intention, stairs, pillow, anything, he stops her. The footage doesn't matter. I won't trade your life for evidence. He stood and opened the door. Cobb stepped in carrying a cot weapon visible at his hip. Mr. Hafner, Cobb said quietly. Right here all night. 10 feet between you and that door. If she walks through it, she walks through me. Stellan gave me one last look. Tomorrow I put the investment in front of Garrett. He'll bite. There's no other move left to him. He's buried himself. The insurance forgery, the healthcare proxy scheme, all of it. He'll pledge your house to scrape together that $800,000. The second he does, we own him. Unless Celeste talks him into bolting first, I said. In that case, we bring charges tomorrow on what's already documented. Either road leads somewhere. Stellan walked out. Cobb unfolded his cot in the corner, checked his weapon, and went still. I lay there in the dark with nothing to look at but the ceiling. That night I got word to Stellan, she senses something closing in. He nodded once. Then we moved faster. Cobb's cot stayed in my room, the gun in plain sight at his hip. 3 things were coming with the morning. Stellan would dangle the investment. Garrett would have to commit a crime against my own property to reach it. And either the snare would close or Celeste would move on those stairs ahead of us. Sleep didn't come. It didn't come for Cobb either, rigid in his corner, keeping watch. I tracked Garrett from under half-shut lids as he worked through the bedroom, snapping his briefcase closed with the unhurried certainty of a man who believed the outcome was already settled. Stellan stood framed in the doorway, arms folded tight. Partner, meeting in Philadelphia, back by dinner, Garrett said, straightening his tie. The Berkshire deal is heating up. They want signatures by end of week. Drive safe. 2 flat words from Stellan, nothing else. Garrett put his lips to the crown of my head, cold, obligatory, and left. The Lexus turned over in the driveway, gravel grinding under the tires, then silence took it. Only then did Stellan come to my bedside. He's headed to the notary office on Boylston Street. Stellan said, keeping his voice low. Lexton is already there. I blinked twice the signal we'd agreed on. Lexton Dre. Stellan had laid it out for me the day before his personal attorney, 52 a specialist who had spent his career on fraud cases, the man positioned to put everything on record. Cobb stays here with you, Stellan continued. I'll be downstairs tracking Lexton's texts. If this holds together, we'll have documented proof of forgery inside 2 hours. Cobb came in as Stellan went out, settling into the chair by the window. He gave a single nod, his jacket parted just enough for me to clock the gun at his waist. A precaution in case Celeste decided she had unfinished business with me. The first shock of the day registered at 9:47 a.m. I know because I'd been watching that nightstand clock for hours. Cobb's phone lit up. He scanned it, came to his feet fast, and crossed to the window to look through the curtains. Celeste is gone, he said. Left about 10 minutes after Garrett. Stellan says she told the staff she was visiting her sister in Trenton. Something cold moved through me. Trenton was east, the same heading as Philadelphia? Was she trailing Garrett, or just bad timing? Cobb caught my eyes and read what was in them. Stellan's got a location on both phones, Cobb said. 2 different destinations. She's genuinely going to Trenton. I drew a slow breath and held it. Maybe Celeste was simply putting distance between herself and what Garrett was about to do, keeping her hands clean. Deniability built in. The clock barely seemed to move. Cobb sat without fidgeting, checking his phone in intervals. I counted tiles overhead, tracked muffled kitchen sounds from below, and kept turning. The same question over, was Lexton Dre actually the man Stellan had described? At 11:23 a.m., the phone buzzed again. Something shifted in Cobb's face as he read a focused, controlled satisfaction. Lexton confirms Garrett just walked in, Cobb said. He's in the room next door. Recording is active. 5 minutes then, another buzz. Cobb read aloud, voice pulled down to almost nothing. Subject presenting documents, claims power of attorney for Roland Hafner. Notary going through the paperwork. My house. Garrett was putting up my $320,000 Kensington house. The one my parents left me. The one soaked through with every memory of my childhood. Something hot and sharp began building behind my ribs. Subject executing signature now. Forgery captured audio and visual both clean. Cobb looked up from the screen. We have him. Another message. Notary stamp applied. Subject issued check for $280,000. Transaction closed. Subject has left the building. Securing certified documentation per protocol. Cobb set the phone on his knee. Lexton knows what he's doing. Certified copies, full recording, notary testimony on record. Every piece of it stands up in court. Every part of me wanted to rage, to charge downstairs, to get the police on the line that instant. But Stellan's plan needed more time. The investment trap still had to close the piece that would catch Garrett inside an illegal scheme and leave him too desperate to think straight. Then, at 12:40 p.m., my door flew open. Not Celeste Stellan, moving with purpose, his composure squeezed down to a hard line across his face. Lexton's here, he said, and footsteps were already hitting the stairs. And then Lexton Dre came through the door, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, gripping a leather portfolio, as though it held something that could detonate. He assessed me in a single sweep, then turned the same look on Cobb. Mr. Hafner, Lexton said, his voice formal and precise. I have just watched your son forge your signature to mortgage your property at 47 Clarendon Street for $280,000. I have the audio hallway security footage showing him entering the loan office and a notary statement confirming he submitted fraudulent power of attorney documents. He cracked open the portfolio and spread everything across my bed. The mortgage papers were right there, and the signature on them was wrong in a way that hit me like a fist. Anyone who had ever seen me write would have known it immediately. The opening letter curled too wide, the angle stiff where mine ran smooth. The notary had no grounds for suspicion. Garrett showed up with a polished forgery and a complete supporting file. The man processed it honestly. My purpose was to establish that the power of attorney itself was fraudulent at its source, something no notary is equipped to catch on his own, Lexton went on. The state board complaint has already been filed, but what matters most is that what we're holding now will survive criminal court. Stellan leaned in over the documents, time-stamped, witnessed, recorded. This is what we needed. Cobb's phone buzzed. He looked at it and the expression drained from his face. His eyes went to Stellan. Something crossed between them in that look, and whatever it was turned my blood cold. What Stellan pressed. Text from the tech guy, Cobb said, measuring each word. The one running sweeps on every device in this house. He raised the phone so Stellan could see the screen. Stellan's jaw set like concrete. What does it say? Lexton asked. Stellan's answer came out, even each word held under deliberate control. Celeste loaded monitoring software onto my phone 3 days ago. Every text I've sent or received, she's been reading them all. That news hit the room like a detonation. Every message Lexton had sent, every update from outside the notary office, every thread of the operation we'd been running. Celeste had been watching it happen in real time. Lexton swore under his breath. Cobb rose his hand, moving toward his jacket. She knows who you are, Stellan said to Lexton. She knows about the forgery evidence. All of it. I forced my hand upward, an urgent, insistent signal. Stellan looked over. I pushed my gaze toward the communication board. Cobb brought it to me. Before I could form a single letter, his phone buzzed again. He read it, Fossey closing down. She's had a live window into Stellan's phone, he said. Tech just confirmed remote access running in real time. She saw Lexton's name in those messages, searched him, probably had him tied to Stellan within minutes. Stellan stood motionless, face unreadable. If she knows Lexton was here, she knows what he brought with him. They won't wait. They'll be gone before morning. He reached his decision in under 30 seconds. We keep going, he said, phone still in hand. Cobb's expression said he had doubts. If she's been inside your texts, the investment plan was never in a text Stellan cut in. Every word of it was spoken in this room, with Lexton present, nothing committed to writing or any device. Let her search every message on my phone. She'll find the forgery. She'll find your name, Lexton. What she will not find is anything about the clinic investment. That conversation has no existence outside these walls. From here on, Stellan said to Lexton, all communication runs through you. Encrypted channels, burner phones, nothing else. Celeste thinks she has the upper hand because she's tapped one line. We'll run 10 she knows nothing about. Lexton was already nodding, closing the portfolio. The forgery evidence is secure. When do we trigger the second trap? 2 days, Stellan said. Friday morning, I put the investment offer on the table in front of Garrett. He just walked out of that notary's office with $280,000. He'll be looking for a place to move it. They didn't run. On February 2nd, 2 days after the mortgage closed, Stellan summoned Garrett to his office. I was in my wheelchair by the window, hands quiet in my lap, holding my part of the performance together. Gar, come in, Stellan said, warmth filling his voice. There's a business opportunity I'd like to talk through with you. The twist arrived the instant Garrett settled into the chair across the desk, loose, confident, completely at ease. Stellan was offering my son a partnership 48 hours after recording his federal crime. Every note of warmth in the room was a prop. The opportunity was a baited hook. I'm moving into a new area, Stellan said, guiding a glossy prospectus across the desk toward him. A chain of 5 private neurology clinics, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Connecticut. The market is right for it. Aging patient base, too few specialists to meet demand, reimbursement rates still climbing. Garrett lifted the prospectus and began working through the pages. Numbers, charts, revenue projections, I could make them out from where I sat. Projected ROI of 340% over 4 years, Stellan continued. Minimum commitment is $800,000. 3 partners are already committed. You'd come in as the 4th. Your father told me healthcare investment is your field. Garrett looked up, something lighting behind his eyes. This is exactly what I've been trying to find. What's the schedule? First acquisition closes in March, Stellan said. I need commitments by next week. I watched my son lean forward, calculating. He was about to invest my house. The pattern interrupt hit me like a jolt of electricity. My childhood home, my parents' legacy on the verge of being poured into Stellan's manufactured opportunity without a second thought. The fundamentals look solid, Garrett said, still working through the pages. What's your acquisition strategy? Are you buying established practices or building new ones from the ground up? Stellan walked him through the particulars, target practices, staffing models, equipment, leasing arrangements, patient acquisition costs. It sounded credible because most of it was. Stellan had done legitimate consulting work on neurology clinic expansions. He knew the vocabulary, the metrics, the real-world challenges. I'm interested, Garrett said at last. Very interested. Can we talk about how to structure the financing? Of course, Stellan said, settling back in his chair. The buy-in is $800,000. I assume you have capital ready to deploy. Garrett paused just briefly. I have $280,000 liquid at the moment. Can we structure the remainder on delivery installments spread over the next 6 months? Stellan let a beat of silence pass, as if weighing the idea. I knew he'd rehearsed this exact exchange. That's unconventional, he said slowly. But given your father's condition, given that you're family, I'll make the accommodation. Family consideration. I appreciate that, Garrett said. My wife is expecting a substantial payout soon. Insurance matter. I can cover the balance by summer, possibly earlier. Celeste's life insurance scheme. My son was spending stolen money and counting on my death to settle the debt. I held my face still, my hands motionless. That works for me, Stellan said. I'll have my attorney draw up the partnership agreement. We can execute it next week. Actually, Garrett said, if you have the paperwork on hand, I'd rather close today. Lock in my position before you bring in a fourth partner. Stellan smiled. I can have the contract ready within the hour. Are you free this afternoon? Absolutely. Please note, what follows includes recreated legal details for narrative purposes. 2 hours later, Garrett returned. Stellan produced a 52-page investment contract, bound in burgundy covers with silver lettering. Standard partnership agreement, Stellan said. My attorney drafted it this morning. Take your time. Garrett leafed through the page's boilerplate language, confidentiality clauses, profit-sharing formulas, dispute resolution procedures. I recognized the rhythm of it from my own business years. Page after page of dense legal text, numbing in its repetition. How many times had Garrett put his name on documents he hadn't truly read, leaning on his own expertise as a substitute for scrutiny? The second pattern, interrupt, burned through me as I watched him skim sections, nod, turn pages, without actually absorbing them. Page 31, section 14C, buried deep inside a paragraph about capital verification and source documentation. The fraud forfeiture clause. Any fraudulent financing during the investment period forfeits all invested capital plus treble damages as liquidated compensation. Garrett's eyes swept over it without slowing. Just more legal boilerplate standard protective language. He kept going. Looks clean, Garrett said, arriving at page 52. I've reviewed hundreds of these standard stuff. Initial each page, Stellan said, extending a pen. Signature on the last. I'll witness it. I watched my son initial 52 pages, watched him sign his full name on the final page, dating it February 2nd, 2023. Watched him smile as Stellan countersigned, making it binding. Welcome to the partnership, Stellan said, gripping Garrett's hand. This is a sound investment. You'll see strong returns. When does the first clinic acquisition happen? Garrett asked. March 15th, Stellan said smoothly. I'll keep you updated as due diligence progresses. Garrett left the office still smiling. Stellan waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway, then eased the door shut. He crossed to my wheelchair, set a copy of the contract in my lap, opened to page 31. Yellow highlighter marked section 14C. I read the words slowly, the meaning blooming like cold fire. Any capital derived from fraud, forgery, or misrepresentation forfeits all invested amounts plus treble damages as liquidated compensation to the partnership. He just signed a confession, Stellan said quietly. The moment we file the forgery evidence with authorities, this contract guarantees he forfeits the $280,000 he invested plus $840,000 in penalties, total $1.12 million. I looked up at Stellan. My son had just agreed in writing to repay me triple what he'd taken. The exit twist Stellan went on is that he did it voluntarily, eagerly. He believed he was positioning himself to get rich, while in reality, he was signing away everything, including money he hadn't even stolen yet. I watched my son shake Stellan's hand through the window. Saw him walk to his car, still smiling like a man who'd just won something. Stellan turned back to me, contract in hand. But Celeste is sharper than Garrett, he said, his expression tightening. And she's already started asking questions about my sudden generosity. We need to be prepared for her. Celeste's questions turned into demands by nightfall. She cornered Stellan in the kitchen, wanting to know why he had offered Garrett a partnership out of nowhere, why the terms were so favorable, why Lexton Dre's name was showing up in public records as a fraud attorney. Stellan made the call at midnight. We move tomorrow morning. No more waiting. The next morning, February 3rd, Garrett came to my bedroom at 8 o'clock, uncommonly attentive, carrying coffee he'd brewed himself. He set the cup on my nightstand, adjusted my pillows, smoothed the blanket across my chest with the deliberate tenderness of a dutiful son. Celeste stood in the doorway, watching, not helping, just watching. "He looks peaceful today," Garrett said, taking my hand. "Better than yesterday." "Did Stellan adjust his medication?" Celeste asked. Stellan appeared at the top of the stairs, his voice easy. "No changes to his regimen, same as it's been." Garrett held my hand, checked my pulse with his thumb, pressed to my wrist. Playing doctor. Playing the devoted son. I kept my eyes half shut, tracking every movement through my lashes. "The investment I made will secure Dad's care long term," Garrett said, still holding my hand. "Private nursing, the finest facilities, whatever he needs." I decided it was time to stop pretending. I opened my eyes fully. Not the glazed, vacant stare I'd held for 2 weeks, sharp and clear, and fixed directly on my son's face. The entry twist landed in the shift of my expression, in the sudden alertness that made Gare's smile go rigid. For the first time in 2 weeks, I spoke in my real voice. "I never stopped recognizing you, son." Garrett dropped my hand as if it had scorched him. He stumbled backward, catching the nightstand, knocking the coffee cup to the floor. It shattered. Dark liquid spread across white tile. Every word, I continued sitting up slightly. Every plan, every lie. "Dad, you're how long of you?" Gar couldn't finish a sentence, couldn't process what he was seeing. "Since you put me in Stellan's car at the hospital," I said. I heard everything. 2 weeks of silence ended in 5 words. The pattern interrupt hit like a detonation. All that performed helplessness. All that careful watching collapsing into this single moment of revelation. Celeste turned to run. She spun toward the stairs, moving fast, but Stellan stepped into the doorway and blocked her path. Cobb appeared behind him, arms folded, filling the remaining space. "Get out of my way," Celeste said, her voice hard. "Now!" "Miss Moorfield," Stellan said, his tone perfectly composed. "I think you should sit down. We have some things to discuss." "Move," Celeste demanded. "The ferry doesn't leave for 3 hours," Stellan continued, "and the police are already on the island. Where exactly are you planning to go?" Garrett turned to stare at Celeste, his paralysis cracking. "What did you do, Celeste?" he whispered. "What did I do?" Celeste's laugh was sharp and bitter. "What did you do? You signed a contract with a fraud clause after forging your father's signature. You walked straight into a trap so obvious." "Obvious to you," I said from the bed. "Not to him." Celeste's mouth went shut. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw the instant she understood. Not only that I was conscious, but that I had been watching her specifically, learning her patterns, documenting her intelligence. "Sit down," Stellan said again. This time Celeste moved to the chair by the window. Garrett stayed on his feet, swaying slightly, staring at me as though I'd come back from somewhere he'd sent me. Stellan produced a leather folder from his jacket. He came to my bedside and began laying documents across the blanket one by one, where I could see them plainly. "January 31st, Stellan said, placing the first document. Garrett forged his father's signature to mortgage the Kensington property. $280,000. The photograph showed my signature wrong, flourish wrong, pressure obviously fraudulent to anyone who knew my handwriting. Lexton Dre's notarization stamp in the corner, time-stamped, witnessed irrefutable. February 2nd. Stellan continued adding the investment contract. Garrett invested those stolen funds in a partnership carrying a fraud forfeiture clause. Total penalty $1.12 million. Page 31, Section 14. C, highlighted in yellow. Garrett's signature at the bottom, dated and witnessed. January 28th. Stellan said, setting down a third document, Celeste submitted an accidental death insurance claim for an accident that never happened. $500,000 in attempted fraud. Celeste's handwriting filled the claim form. Fake police report number, forged medical documentation asserting I had stage 4 dementia and couldn't contest the claim. How does a father watch his son plan his death and say nothing? The second pattern interrupt scorched through my mind as I surveyed the evidence laid out across the bed. The answer: because silence uncovers truth, that confrontation never would. "You set this up," Celeste said, her eyes cutting to Stellan. "You manipulated vulnerable people." I documented crimes already in motion, Stellan interrupted. Roland came to me because he suspected his son was robbing him blind. We simply created the conditions to prove it, entrapment Celeste said. Would never hold up in court, Cobb said from the doorway. A private citizen can't commit entrapment. That's a defense reserved for law enforcement. Garrett finally found something to say. Dad, I can explain. You already have, I said, and swung my legs over the side of the bed. First voluntary movement in 2 weeks. My muscles screamed at the effort stiff from lying still so long, but I pushed myself upright. I heard your explanation to Celeste the night I arrived. $1 million in life insurance. How much simpler everything would be once I was gone. Garrett's face drained of color. I heard Celeste say she wanted to move things along faster. I went on. I watched you leave for Philadelphia on January 31st, carrying forged power of attorney documents. I listened to you tell Stellan about the investment deal you needed $800,000 for. I watched you sign that contract without ever turning to page 31. I stood there unsteady, both hands wrapped around the bed frame, but on my feet looking my son straight in the eyes. I wanted to see how far you'd go, I said quietly. Now I know. The exit twist settled over the room like fallout. I hadn't been a helpless victim lying in that bed. I'd been a witness, a willing participant deliberately letting my son commit federal crimes while Stellan cataloged every one. Testing, measuring, building proof that couldn't be argued away. Garrett sank onto the foot of the bed, his head dropping into his hands. His shoulders shook. I saw something I had never seen before. My son's face at the moment he understood he'd been caught. Not angry, not defiant, afraid. The kind of fear that arrives when you finally grasp that the trap closed weeks ago and every day since you've only been digging it deeper. But Celeste wasn't afraid. She sat in that chair beside the window, perfectly still, her eyes tracking between Stellan Cobb, the documents, and the door. Not panicking, calculating, already working on her next move. Celeste's next move came while Stellan kept Garrett occupied. Stellan insisted my son go over civil settlement documents in his study. No criminal charges, but full asset forfeiture. While the two of them were tied up in that, Celeste slipped out through the villa's back door. Cobb checked my room at 6:30. Ms. Moorfield isn't in her room, he told Stellan, or anywhere else in the house. Stellan went to pull up the security footage. I followed in my wheelchair muscles, still weak but holding. The monitor showed Celeste in Stellan's private office at 6:47 p.m. She'd forced his desk safe open with a crowbar from the garage. The entry twist landed as we watched her pull out cash $52,000 that Stellan kept for emergencies and the forged insurance check claiming I'd died. She was planning her exit while she was still planning mine, I said quietly. Stellan's jaw tightened. I froze their joint accounts this morning. She needed cash. What's missing from the safe? Garrett appeared in the doorway, face ashen. What did she take Stellan? Replayed the footage. We all watched Garrett watch his wife steal from them and walk away without looking back. Where is she now? Garrett asked. Cobb checked the external cameras. Ferry terminal 17 minutes ago. The 7:15 p.m. ferry last boat out before the nor'easter shut everything down. The footage showed Celeste boarding through snow that was already piling up. Garrett ran for the dock without a coat or gloves. He missed the ferry by 4 minutes. We watched from Stellan's car as my son stood at the end of that dock, staring at lights swallowed by darkness. Then he turned toward the private charter office. $3,000 to get me to the mainland, Garrett told the captain inside Captain Grady Pelletier. 62, a weathered face, 30 years running boats through these waters. Pelletier looked at the sky. Sir, there's a nor'easter bearing down. Ferries shut down for a reason. My wife is running, Garrett said. I need to stop her. 3,000 isn't worth dying for. 5,000. Pelletier took the money. 20 minutes later, Garrett's speedboat vanished into the storm, the bow slamming into 8-foot waves. What drives a man to risk his life for money, he stole from his own father. The pattern interrupt burned through me as I watched my son chase his accomplice into a blizzard. Not love, not loyalty, desperation, the kind that makes every decision irrational. He's going to get himself killed out there, Cobb said. Or he'll make the mainland and track her down, Stellan said. Stellan had monitoring access on their credit cards. At 8:52 p.m., Celeste's card pinged at a Lewis, Delaware rental company. At 9:14 p.m., Garrett's card hit the same location. The chase moved on to Interstate 95 North. We went back to the villa. Stellan watched the GPS feeds. Celeste's rental appeared as a blue dot, pushing fast toward New Hampshire. Garrett's red dot followed 20 miles behind and closing. State police closed I-95 at 10:30 p.m., but both cars were already north of the shutdown. Wind gusts touching 60 miles per hour. Traffic cameras showed nothing but white static. "They need to stop," I said. "Pull over." But the dots kept moving, blue-red narrowing. At 11:47 p.m., both dots went still near exit 45. Stellan called state police. They had already had crash reports coming in. Units responding delayed by the weather, we waited. I sat in my wheelchair, hands gripping the armrests, staring at two motionless dots on a laptop screen. Stellan's phone rang at 3:52 a.m. He listened face, unreadable, then came to my bedroom where I hadn't slept. "There's been an accident," Stellan said quietly. "Celeste is dead. Gar is in intensive care." The exit twist landed with absolute finality. Not arrest, not prosecution, death and catastrophic injury. Stellan read from the police report. A single vehicle collision, I-95 north near exit 45, blizzard conditions, black ice. Female victim, DOA, at scene, blunt force trauma. Male driver, critical unresponsive lace. Flighted to Jefferson University Hospital. Estimated impact, speed 73 miles per hour. I wanted justice, not this. Reconstruction suggests the female driver had stopped on the shoulder. Stellan continued. Mechanical problem or checking navigation. Male driver came in, fast tried to brake, lost it on the ice. Struck the stopped car's driver's side at full speed. Celeste died on impact steering column through her chest car crushed against the guardrail. Garrett's airbag deployed, but his head hit the A-pillar. Severe traumatic brain injury. Glasgow Coma Scale of 3, the lowest possible score in a living person. $52,000 in cash was found scattered across the snow, Stellan said, and the forged insurance check in Celeste's purse, ink smeared from the impact. I closed my eyes. $52,000 blowing in the wind at a crash site, the price Celeste put on her escape, the price Garrett paid chasing her. Police are calling it weather-related, Stellan said. But we know he was chasing her. He made the choice to drive into that storm. Cobb spoke from the doorway. "What hospital?" "Jefferson University Hospital," Stellan said. "Same ICU, where Garrett planned to let your father die." My son was on life support in the same hospital, the same intensive care unit where he had arranged my transfer. They listed me as emergency contact from the investment contract, Stellan said. They're asking about treatment decisions, life support, resuscitation protocols. "Why you?" I asked. "Because Garrett is incapacitated and Celeste is dead. You're his only family, but you've been legally incompetent for 2 weeks. So they're asking the person holding medical power of attorney." He held up the forged document Garrett had drawn up, giving Stellan authority over my care. An ironic Cobb said. The police report came through at 4 a.m. with full particulars. Crash site. I-95, North 1, Dead 1, critical Jefferson University Hospital. Celeste was gone. Garrett was on life support in the same ICU where he had planned to let me fade away. I had gotten exactly what I set out to prove, but the cost was something I hadn't figured into the equation. Stellan looked at me. "We need to go to Philadelphia. Your son is dying, and you have a decision to make." We were still sitting with the police report when Stellan's phone rang again at 4:03 a.m. Not state police this time. Jefferson University Hospital Trauma, line the one that only calls when no one else can handle the case. Stellan answered, listened, his expression moving from exhaustion to sharp attention. C1 fracture with brainstem involvement. What's the timeline? A pause, then a patient name, another pause longer this time. Stellan's eyes found mine across the room. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know him." He ended the call and sat down across from me. That was Dr. Stroud, Jefferson University Hospital, Chief of Trauma. I-95 crash victim just brought in. Atlas fracture with pontine hemorrhage. Patient declining fast. No other neurosurgeons available. The snowstorm had grounded the Philadelphia team on call. The other surgeon is in an emergency appendectomy. Who I asked, though, I already knew, Garrett Stellan said. They need me to operate. He has maybe 2 hours before herniation kills him. The entry twist settled over us like a shroud. The hospital was asking Stellan to save the man who had tried to kill his closest friend. Stellan could refuse conflict of interest and let someone else handle it when they became available. Except no one else would be available in time. Can you? I asked. Technically, yes, Stellan said. The surgery is complex but within my specialty. Ethically, he stopped, looked down at his hands. They're asking me to save your son. I can refuse, or I can save him. My hands were locked around the wheelchair armrests as I stared up at the man who had spent months building a case against my son, and who now held the power to pull him back from death, or simply step aside. Could I have told Stellan to walk away? Let Garrett die on the grounds that he'd earned it? That question cut straight through my exhaustion. This was the reckoning Stellan had warned me was coming, just not in this shape. What do you want to do? I asked. I took an oath, Stellan said flat and quiet. But you need to hear this. If I go in there, it's because that man is a patient who requires surgery. Not out of loyalty to you. Not as any form of forgiveness. My oath demands it, and that's the only reason. I gave a slow nod. Stellan rang Dr. Stroud back. I'm on my way, but put it in writing. My connection to this patient is a personal conflict of interest. If litigation follows from him or his estate, I need documentation that you authorized me to proceed. Dr. Stroud agreed. Stellan ended the call and stood. Helicopter's 20 minutes out. Cobb, get Roland ready to move. He should be at the hospital. The helicopter touched down in Stellan's field at 4:47 a.m. Stellan rode it alone. The pilot was managing weight against the storm. Cobb drove me in Stellan's car through snow, still coming down hard roads barely passable. Stellan reached Jefferson University Hospital at 5:47 a.m. I learned all of this afterward from Cobb, who had timed every minute with a near-obsessive precision. Stellan pushed into the trauma bay and found Garrett on a gurney. Swelling had erased his features. Blood tracked from both ears battle's sign, the skull fracture's marker. Willa Garland, 48 lead surgical nurse with 20 years of trauma. Behind her handed Stellan the CT scans. Atlas shattered in 3 places. Garland said, voice steady and professional. Pontine bleed expanding intracranial pressure climbing. Stellan raised the films to the light. He told me later he stopped for exactly 1 second, 1 beat, spent looking at images of my son's brain hemorrhaging into itself. Doctor, do you have a prior relationship with this patient? Garland asked. Yes, Stellan said, pulling on gloves. Which is why the conflict goes on record. We're moving. Get 07 open. Spinal frame and neuronavigation both. Time estimate, Garland asked. 5 hours if it goes cleanly, 7 if it doesn't. Stellan's hands were already in motion. No anger, no hesitation, just surgical command, nothing wasted. When Cobb relayed this to me later, something in me went still. Stellan had brought the same disciplined precision to Garrett's case that he'd bring to any anonymous patient, no residue of personal history, no tremor of resentment. Or timeline 6, 12 a.m. to 11:08 a.m., 4 hours, 56 minutes. Cobb pulled every figure from the surgical log. Stellan addressed the pontine hemorrhage first microscopic approach, draining the hematoma while leaving the reticular formation intact, the structure whose damage makes brainstem bleeds fatal. Then C1 stabilization, titanium screws placed with millimeter precision, bone grafts harvested and positioned, anterior and posterior fusion to reconstruct the shattered atlas, the vertebra anchoring my son's skull to his spine. Garland logged every step. Technique flawless. Complications none. Vitals stable throughout. Blood loss minimal. Prognosis the patient would live. Stellan operated as though Garrett were a stranger. Perfect. Clinical. Masterful. I arrived at Jefferson University Hospital at 11:30 a.m. Cobb had pushed through conditions that had forced most drivers off the road entirely. We found the surgical waiting area. White walls, a coffee machine in one corner, chairs fixed to the floor. Stellan came in at 11:34 a.m., still in scrubs cap, balled in his fist, exhaustion worn openly across his face. 32 hours without sleep. Surgery was successful, Stellan said. He's alive, but you need to sit down first. I was already seated, but I understood what he meant. I tightened my grip on the armrests. The pontine damage is extensive, Stellan said, keeping his voice carefully level. Something inside me went quiet. The bleeding controlled. The fracture addressing that preserved his life. But the brainstem injury is permanent. What does that mean? I asked, though part of me already knew. He'll be conscious, Stellan said. Full awareness, hearing, vision, thought, memory all intact. What's gone is everything else. He'll never walk out of a care facility, never speak again. The clinical term is locked-in syndrome. The weight of it settled like a verdict no one had formally delivered. Garrett had built that exact diagnosis around me, told insurers I was sealed inside a motionless body, unable to reach the world, a living asset he could maneuver for profit. And now, without any deliberate punishment, that lie had fastened itself to him permanently. What I'm telling you, Stellan said, is that your son may draw breath for years, decades maybe, fully conscious of every passing moment, paralyzed from the neck down, no voice. Eye movement, if we're fortunate, is the only channel he has left. That's all he'll ever have. Cobb hadn't moved from behind my chair. The condition he fabricated for you, Stellan said quietly, is the one he'll actually inhabit for the rest of his life. I didn't produce this. The crash did. I only kept him from dying inside it. I closed my eyes. Justice and horror folded into each other so completely, I couldn't find where one ended. Do you want to see him? Stellan asked. Stellan led me to a private consultation room before I could answer. He shut the door, settled into a chair across from me, and took the posture of a physician about to change every calculation. Before you go in there, Stellan said, you need to understand what your son has become. I held the armrests and waited. The C1 Atlas, I could fix that, Stellan began. First vertebra, the one the skull rests on, titanium hardware, bone grafting, structural restoration. That part held. He chose his next words carefully. The pontine hemorrhage is different, he continued. The pons sits in the brainstem. It governs voluntary movement and speech. Once that tissue bleeds and dies, nothing regenerates it. No surgery reaches what's already gone. What are we left with? I asked. Complete paralysis, Stellan said. Total from the neck down, arms, legs, torso, every facial muscle. But his mind is perfectly intact. His awareness, his memory, his capacity for thought and feeling, all of that survived. Cold moved through my chest. So, he's aware. Fully, Stellan confirmed. Pain, sound, sight, thought, all present. The one absence is any physical response except his eyes. Vertical movement, blinking, nothing beyond that. My son would spend decades locked inside himself. That realization didn't arrive gradually, it landed. This wasn't death, which at least carries finality. This was unending consciousness with no way out. He can't speak, I asked. Nothing, no vocal cords, no facial control, no hands. Can't write, can't swallow without a feeding tube. But he'll register every exchange near him, Stellan said. Every voice, every visitor, the television on the wall, nurses moving through the room. He'll absorb all of it with complete clarity and have no means of reply. Eye movements only, Stellan said. The team will build a system with him. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Up for one answer, down for another. That's the ceiling of his communication for whatever years remain. I shut my eyes. Behind them, I could see Garrett, my son, imprisoned behind a gaze that could offer only a blink, with no way to rage plead or account for anything he'd done. The insurance filing, I said, eyes opening. Celeste described me as having locked-in syndrome. Stellan nodded slowly. I read it. She mapped the symptoms with clinical precision, clearly sourced from a medical text to make the fraud airtight. Conscious, fully paralyzed communication, impossible. And now her husband has it for real. Yes. Was this justice or simply cruelty wearing a different face? Something settled into me as I held Stellan's gaze. Every detail of the lie Garrett and Celeste had constructed, the invented paralysis. The fabricated imprisonment had become Garrett's permanent reality. Is that why you operated? I asked quietly. To make sure he survived like this. Stellan's expression hardened. I operated because my oath gave me no other option. Walking past a patient I have the skill to save would make me a killer, not a physician. What happened to Garrett is the crash, the injury, not me. But you knew. The moment I reviewed his CT scans, Stellan admitted, I knew exactly what his survival would look like. And I went ahead because surgeons don't rank lives by what they deserve. We save them. Silence stretched between us. Through the walls came the faint percussion of monitors, nurses' voices somewhere down the corridor, the rhythmic sigh of ventilators. How long? I finally asked. How long does this go on? Stellan leaned back. Jean-Dominique Bauby lived 2 years after his stroke, dictated a book through blinking. Tony Kwan, the artist, lived 16 years. There's no fixed measure, just years of consciousness without movement. Can he die from it? Only secondary complications, Stellan said. Pneumonia-spreading infection bed sores that reach the bloodstream. The syndrome itself isn't terminal. With full medical support, ventilation feeding tube round-the-clock nursing locked-in patients can live for decades. I did the math. Garrett was 34. He could reach 60 still trapped, still blinking yes or no, still unable to move or speak or touch anything. Quality of life. Medically speaking, zero. Stellan said, no softness in it. But he'll have a pulse. He'll be awake behind those eyes, thinking, remembering, feeling every second of it. Stellan didn't try to cushion that. I sat there in the wheelchair, a faint shake in my hands. My own son had built a trap around this very condition. He'd fed false papers to an insurance company, painting me as a prisoner, in my own flesh, a helpless thing he could drain for profit. Now that same fiction would become his lived reality. Stellan looked at me. What did I want to do with that? The options were clear enough. Mortgage fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy charges he could face. I could go in and confront Garrett myself, or turn my back on that room entirely, hand everything to prosecutors, and never lay eyes on him again. Walking away pulled at me, climbing into Cobb's car, pointing it toward Cape May, New Jersey, leaving Garrett to spend the rest of his years communicating in blinks with nurses who didn't know him. Never standing in that room, watching what righteous consequence looked like up close. But something held me. Not yet. Let me see him, I told Stellan. He didn't answer right away. You're certain, he said. There's no coming back from it once you do. Garrett in that bed, eyes open, mind running, body locked. That image doesn't leave. It takes up permanent residence. I need to meet his eyes, I said. Something shifted in Stellan's face, a recognition that what I was after wasn't revenge, wasn't satisfaction. It was something harder, a reckoning with what justice turns into when it lands this exactly. I need to know if he's still in there, I went on. Whether he grasps the full weight of what he did. Whether there's remorse behind those eyes or just paralysis. Stellan got to his feet. All right, but he'll see you walk through that door. He'll know you chose to come. He'll watch every move you make, and there won't be a syllable he can utter in response. I know, I said. Stellan pushed open the consultation room door and gestured down the corridor. Room 7. Are you ready? I wasn't. I went anyway. I crossed the threshold of ICU room 7 under my own power. No chair, no trembling, no act, just a man walking in to face his son. Garrett's gaze locked onto me the instant I appeared. His eyes flew wide, the only motion his body still permitted. I watched comprehension move across him in real time. The father who had supposedly lain unresponsive for 2 weeks was standing on his own feet, moving, forming words. Hello, Garrett, I said. My voice didn't waver. Every word I say you're hearing, every word you understand. Tears spilled from his eyes. No crying, no heaving, no sound. His body wouldn't allow it. They simply ran those tears down cheeks that couldn't flinch. Wondering how I'm on my feet, I said, stepping closer to the bed. How these words are coming out. It isn't complicated. I never lost the ability. The truth of that hung over the room like something physical. Garrett tracked me with those eyes. 2 things fighting in them, horror and full understanding of what he'd done. 14 days of orchestrating my death, stripping away everything I owned, talking openly about how to finish me, all of it played out in front of a witness who never missed a moment. Stellan held position in the doorway, not speaking. He'd warned me this would scar me, that the image would outlast everything else. He wasn't wrong. The way my son looked at me, I'll carry that until I can't carry anything anymore. Your father was never sick, Stellan said, his voice barely above a murmur. Every word, every move, it was documentation. I slid my hand into my jacket and drew out a small cedar box, the wood polished to silk by 30 years of being held. I set it on the table next to Garrett's bed, among the monitors marking his pulse and the machine pushing air into his lungs. This box, I said, lifting its lid. Stellan put it in my hands 30 years ago, the night he kept me alive. You never heard that story. Inside paper gone yellow, with age folded into quarters, 7 words written in my own hand. Beneath that 2 objects Stellan had placed there since a hospital bracelet from a night in January 1993. And a photograph I'd never laid eyes on. 2 younger men, Stellan in scrubs from his residency, Me bundled in an emergency blanket on a bus bench, shot by a paramedic passing by who figured we were father and son. That cedar box rested between us, like 30 years of debt, finally coming due. Something shifted in my thinking right then. Garrett's betrayal was only part of it. The deeper thing was about obligation that circles back who pulls someone from the edge, what that costs, what it means, across decades. January 1993, I said. I was behind the wheel on the last Route 23 run of that night. A young man was crumpled at a bus stop, in a blizzard, body temperature dropping nearly gone. I got him into the vehicle and drove him somewhere warm. That man was Stellan, 28 years old, a third-year medical student with no money for a cab. Garrett's eyes moved to Stellan, then found me again. 30 years on, he saved you, I said. Not on your merits because I asked him to. Because he's a finer man than either of us. I shut the box and lowered myself into the chair at Garrett's bedside. The ICU smell hit me antiseptic cold, clinical. The monitors kept their steady pulse. Somewhere further along the hall, a nurse's laughter cut through. I love you, I said, my eyes not leaving his. That hasn't changed, but I'm letting go of you. How does a man say both of those things to his own son in the same breath? What came out of me next had never crossed my mind as words I'd actually say. It isn't hatred driving this, I continued. It's that I'm emptied out. You plotted to end my life for money. Celeste ran into a blizzard chasing that same money and died. Now you're living inside what that cost. And my throat closed on me. I'm worn through Garrett, fighting to hold on to a son who was willing to put me in the ground. I can't keep doing it. Garrett blinked. Twice. No. The blink system Stellan had walked me through. I hear what you're telling me, I said. But my decision isn't up for a vote. This isn't punishment. It's release. Letting go of you. Letting go of the weight of carrying you. Before moving to the bedside, Stellan reached inside his coat and drew out a single sheet, setting it on the table ahead of anything else. First things first, he said quietly. This one needs your name on it. 1 page, a Pennsylvania probate court, Form MPC40, Certificate of Restored Competency. My full name, my birth date. Stellan's attending physician's signature, dated that morning, countersigned by the hospital's legal office. I submitted it at 8 a.m. today, Stellan said. From that moment forward, there is no incompetency finding anywhere on your record. In the eyes of the law, you are entirely yourself again. Every mark you put on what follows is yours, binding and forcible beyond any challenge. I picked up the pen and put my name on the acknowledgement line. 3 seconds. 37 days of playing the helpless man, erased by 3 seconds, and a single pen stroke on a court document. Then Stellan laid 3 more pages beside the cedar box. First document, he said, his physician's voice measured and even. Asset forfeiture agreement, property return. Garrett relinquishes every claim over your home, your life insurance, your estate. I lifted it and read it through. Dense legalese, but the meaning was plain. Everything Garrett had gone after handed back. The second, Stellan went on, is a victim impact statement for federal prosecutors. Mortgage fraud, 5 to 30 years. Your account of events locks the conviction. I worked through the second page. My own testimony about uncovering the scheme, the harm it caused, the trust it destroyed. Every word true. Every word devastating. The third, Stellan said, voice dropping is a DNR. Do not resuscitate. Should Garrett's condition decline, cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, the medical team stands down. A way of offering him dignity if the end comes on its own. I held that third page. The only mercy I had left to give. Returns the property, ensures the prosecution offers him dignity if his body fails. Stellan had put it plainly. I brought the pen from my jacket, clicked it open. The small sound filled the room entirely. Off my house, I said to Garrett. Pen above the first line. Off every account, every decision that belongs to me. I signed my actual signature, nothing like the counterfeit Garrett had manufactured. Second page. This is the record of what you did. The prosecutor takes it from here. Even if you never see a courtroom, the conviction stands. I signed. Third page, the DNR. The pen stopped. I looked at him. Tears still running, eyes still fixed on my every movement. If your heart quits, they'll let it, I said quietly. That's all I have to give you now. Not a pardon, not a path back. Just the grace to stop straining when your body reaches its limit. As I signed that final page, something completed a circle closing. Garrett, eyes wide and wet utterly without recourse, watched me dispose of everything: the property, the prosecution, the right to be revived. Legal severance total and irreversible. I set the signed pages down beside the cedar box. Getting to my feet took effort, my knees making their objection known. "Goodbye, Garrett," I said. "Whatever peace exists out there, I hope it finds you." I turned my back and walked toward the door. From behind me, the monitors changed tone, quick, urgent beeping. His heart rate climbing. He was working his eyes in fast sequences, 1, 2, 3 blinks patterns. I either couldn't read or had chosen to stop trying to. I didn't slow down. Stellan came out behind me. The door met its frame with a quiet click. Stellan's hand came to rest on my shoulder in the corridor. "You did what you had to." Words wouldn't come, I just nodded. On the other side of that door, my son lay sealed inside his own flesh, alone, with beeping equipment and awareness and the paperwork that had ended us. "One more thing," Stellan said. Lexton Dre had shown up. With him was an investigator out of the U.S. Attorney's Office, preliminary, not a formal proceeding. They were after my account while the events were still sharp. Stellan's mention of Lexton and the prosecutor stopped me cold. But something dragged me backward before I could face them. "Hold on," I said. "One more document, the life insurance." Stellan drew a beneficiary change form from his folder. The $1 million policy that Lexton had moved to freeze as potential fraud evidence when Celeste's scheme first came to light. The one the court had returned to me that same morning, now that Celeste was gone and the fraud was on record. I took it from him and pushed back through the door into room 7. Garrett's eyes locked onto me the instant I entered, swollen and red. I walked to the side of his bed and positioned the paper so he could read it. "One more signature," I said. "The most important one, life insurance beneficiary change. Current beneficiary, Garrett Hafner. New beneficiary, blank." "This $1 million policy is the reason you wanted me in the ground," I said. "It's going to charity." Garrett's eyes went wide, rapid blinking, wordless objection. "Philadelphia Hunger Relief Fund," I said. "After my accident in 1993, I had nothing at all. That charity kept me fed for 6 months. No costs, no questions." Stellan was standing in the doorway. "I remember those white containers with the red logos," he said. "You'd eat out of them in the hospital waiting room." I turned back to face Garrett. "Every last dollar you mark my life for is going to someone who truly needs it, the way I once needed it." A certain stillness descended on the room. Justice moving in a circle. $1 million toward feeding people who had nothing. Not a cent for the son who had engineered a murder. It struck me then how much easier everything would be if I could despise him, without this worn-down love still lodged underneath. "You mapped out my death to get this money," I said, pen in hand. "Instead, it'll fill the bellies of thousands rather than line the pockets of one Wall Street lawyer." Each stroke of my signature was slow, deliberate, made sure Garrett could see everyone. Wrote Philadelphia Hunger Relief Fund. Amount $1 million upon death of insured. Dated it. Initialed every page. The tears came harder down Garrett's face. Crying without sound, without recourse. "I see your tears," I said. "But this isn't something I can undo for you. How do you grant forgiveness to a man who has no voice left to ask for it, who can't even mount a defense?" That question tore right through me. There was no clean answer, no yes or no that would fit. "It's finished," Stellan said from the doorway. I stood there gripping the form, my eyes on Gar still tracking, still present, still locked in. "I forgive you, Garrett," I said, "but I won't forget what happened, and I won't be staying." Everything in his eyes pleaded, a mute, desperate bid for me to reconsider the words his body refused to let him speak. There was nothing left to weigh. "Goodbye, son." I stepped through the door and out, never turned around. The beeping from Garrett's monitor quickened his pulse, rising. I put the form in Stellan's hands. "Make sure it gets filed right." "It will," Stellan said. I walked the length of the corridor. Stellan's footsteps retreated behind me, back toward the room. He went to Garrett's bedside. He told me afterward he bent low, put his mouth near Garrett's ear. "You wanted your father warehoused as a vegetable, so the inheritance would flow to you," Stellan murmured. "You and Celeste drew up the plan together. Fabricated paperwork, a fiction that he was locked in no awareness, no ability to reach the world. Now you're the one who's locked in and he's walking free." Garrett's gaze followed Stellan's face. "That Stellan said, is justice. Not revenge, justice. The trap you built for him, you're the one living inside it now. Stellan rose and moved to the threshold. A nurse will look in on you every hour, he said, his voice flat and low. You're not going to die. You're going to live. Aware paralyzed, counting out however many decades your body decides to give you. 30 years, maybe 40, with nothing but your own thoughts and what you did. No words, no movement, no exit. His hand found the light switch. Your father forgave you, he said. I'm not obligated to. The lights went out. The reckoning arrived in the dark. Stellan's final verdict, offered without a trace of softness, Garrett left with nothing but the faint glow of monitors and the drone of machines keeping him alive. The door swung shut. In the darkened room, my son had only his tears and his mind, and the open-ended sentence of a body that wouldn't release him. Stellan had killed the light. I had already gone. The final image Garrett was left with was my back clearing the doorway, the insurance form in Stellan's grip, and the irreversible weight of a last farewell. Stellan tracked me down in the hospital lobby 20 minutes on. I was parked in a plastic chair near the window, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. It's over, he said, dropping into the seat beside me. Is it? I said. Legally, more or less. Lexton and the prosecutor are asking to see you tomorrow. You're free to go home. Home. The word landed strangely. Home had meant the Kensington house Garrett mortgaged behind my back. Home was the rooms where the memory of a son who'd tried to murder me lived in the walls. I'm not sure I can walk back in there, I said. Stellan didn't push. Then don't. Not yet. Come out to Cape May. Take some time. Figure it out later. My legs were unsteady when I stood. What becomes of Garrett? He stays at Jefferson University Hospital until he's stable enough for transfer to long-term care. State placement, most likely. Insurance picks up the tab for a while, then Medicaid. After that, he's a ward of the state. Alone? Alone, Stellan said. We made our way toward the exit. Up behind us, 7 floors overhead, my son was lying in the dark. Nothing left him but tears and cognition, and the unending sentence of a body that could neither speak, nor move, nor surrender. Outside, February air knifed through my coat. Stellan's car sat in the emergency bay engine idling. Cobb was standing next to it with the passenger door already open. Let's go home, Stellan said. I got in. Home, Cape May, New Jersey, not Kensington. Not the house where Garrett's treachery had soaked into every floorboard. Somewhere different. Somewhere my lungs could work again. As Cobb eased us away from Jefferson University Hospital, I took one last look back. 7 floors of glass, mostly black, a handful of lit squares. Somewhere in there, my son was awake and aware and finished. I faced forward and held it there. A week out from leaving Jefferson University Hospital, I returned to the apartment I'd been carried from by ambulance, and the only thing that had changed was me. Cobb drove from Cape May, New Jersey through a gray February sky, Stellan's wooden box sitting across my knees the whole way. We rolled into Philadelphia at 3:30, crawled through Kensington traffic by 4. The same streets, the same brownstones, the same 3rd-floor walk-up green door and all. Cobb hauled my bag up the stairs, just one duffel. The entirety of what I'd taken to the villa had fit in it with space to spare. He put it just inside the threshold and looked at me. You gonna be all right by yourself? I've managed alone before, I said. This is a different kind of alone. This kind is chosen. He dipped his head. Stellan says reach out any hour, day or night. Pass along my thanks, I told him. For all of it. Cobb walked out. The latch caught behind him with the same quiet click it always made. I hadn't stood inside my own home in 26 days. The place was untouched. January 15th. A single plate in the sink, dried eggs stuck to it. I'd planned to clean it before heading out for the morning paper. The crossword lay on the kitchen table, where I'd left it half done, folded to January 15th, 2023. A coffee mug on the counter, brown ring dried at the base. 26 days gone. The world had damn near come apart, and the crossword was still sitting there, waiting on me. I placed the wooden box on the counter next to Dora's photograph, her smile from the wedding day worn at the edges, the one that had faded from her face long before the end. She never found out what Gar turned into. For years I counted that as a loss. Standing in that kitchen now, it felt more like grace. I made coffee, first ordinary thing I'd done in weeks. Grounds measured water, poured button, pressed. The machine went through its familiar coughs and hisses, and somewhere in my ribcage something unclenched at the noise. While it ran, I moved through the apartment, 450 square feet, one-bedroom furniture, stripped to the minimum. I'd walked out of here as a man his own son was hunting. What walked back in was harder to put a name to. Not a survivor, too much victory in that word, for what I'd actually lived through. Closer to a veteran, the kind of person who came through something and emerged on the far side of it with more on their back than when they went in. I poured coffee into the chipped Phillies mug and settled into my chair at the window. That chair, the one angled at the street where I'd planted myself every evening after Dora passed, because 4,500 square feet felt cavernous without the sound of her moving in the next room. Below the city ran its course, cars. Strangers' ordinary lives with no awareness of locked-in syndrome or mortgage fraud, or the specific species of grief that comes from a son who wanted you dead. The coffee tasted the way it always had, before the ambulance ride, before the villa, before any of it. I held that for a long moment. After Dora died, the quiet in this apartment had a texture loneliness, the hollow left by her voice and her step, and the simple fact of her being there. During the weeks at the villa, silence had been something else entirely, a threat. Every quiet moment back then had been a kind of surveillance waiting, reading the air for whatever was coming next. This silence carried none of that. No danger in it. Just me, the coffee, the window, the afternoon sun, turning familiar brick the color of old gold. I was 64 years old, breathing, and no longer anyone's target. That was sufficient, more than I'd honestly counted on. Not long ago, they'd been lifting me into an ambulance. My phone buzzed against the armrest. Philadelphia Hunger Relief Fund had confirmed receipt of $1 million. Opening a new dining room, March 1st. Would I come? I read the message twice. The $1 million Garrett had wanted my life for. The money Celeste had forged papers to get her hands on. Now, it was going to be tables, chairs, hot food. People who had nowhere else to turn. Murder money turned into meals. There wasn't a clean word for that kind of alchemy. Not redemption, not justice exactly. Just transformation, the only kind the situation allowed. I typed back, yes. One word. The screen went dark. Out on the street, the lamps were coming on in sequence as dust settled over Kensington. I'd watched them light up that same way from this window for 12 years, block by block. March 1st was ahead of me now. I'd see for myself what $1 million worth of greed had been turned into. But that night, I had the chair, the coffee, and a quiet that finally felt like something I actually owned. March 15th arrived 2 weeks behind schedule. Construction delays, permit snags. But it arrived. The sign over the door read, Roland's Room. I positioned myself in the back corner and hoped no one would connect a face to a name. Jefferson University Hospital, 3rd floor, a freshly renovated space that had once been storage. 20 tables, an industrial kitchen, a serving line run by volunteers in blue aprons. Free meals for patients' families who couldn't cover cafeteria, costs funded entirely by the Philadelphia Hunger Relief Fund's $1 million gift, the money my son had wanted me dead for. The dedication plaque mounted beside the entrance stopped me where I stood. Roland's Room, in honor of Roland Hafner, whose gift feeds those who cannot pay. Brass lettering, permanent. My name fixed to a wall for something worthy, instead of something I'd have to carry in shame. Stellan stood next to me in a gray suit, playing the part of official representative. I'd worn plain khakis and a cardigan, and was doing my best to melt into the background. "They'd like you to say a few words," Stellan murmured. "The donor doesn't need to be recognized," I said. "That misses the whole point." Stellan gave a small smile. "You're a strange man, Roland." "I'm just alive," I said. "That's enough." 50 people had filled the room. Families with worn-out faces, patients in wheelchairs, children weaving between tables the way they do when the adults stop paying attention. The hospital administrator spoke at a podium about community and giving back. I applauded along with everyone else invisible in my corner. Then a girl of about 7 materialized in front of me. Brown hair and pigtails, pink jacket with butterflies stitched along the collar. She was holding a piece of paper, folded with the careful deliberateness children use when they're protecting something that matters. "Are you Mr. Roland?" she asked. "My mom said you gave money so we could eat here." I crouched down to her height. "I am. I hope the food's been good." "I drew you a picture." She opened the fold. A crayon drawing. A gray-haired man standing next to a yellow bus. Son wedged in one corner. Across the top, in green letters, "Thank you." "What's your name?" I asked. "Lily Horton. My mom has cancer. We come here every day now. It was too expensive before." I accepted the drawing with both hands gently. "This is beautiful, Lily. Thank you." She threw her arms around me, sudden total, the kind of hug a child gives when they genuinely mean it. Then she sprinted back to a woman at a table nearby, thin-tired, watching her daughter, with the careful smile of someone who has learned to spend smiles deliberately. I stood there holding a crayon drawing, reminding myself how to breathe. Stellan found me in the parking garage 20 minutes later. I still had it in my hands. "You doing all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said, just sitting with it. We moved toward his car without talking. Stellan let me have the silence. He always knew when that was the right call. Nearly 2 months since the crash. Celeste gone. Garrett in long-term care, conscious, trapped alive. And me in a parking garage gripping a child's drawing of a yellow bus, alive, in a way I'd never actually planned on being. "So what comes next?" Stellan asked at last. "You're 64, retired, and nobody's hunting you." I let the question settle. "I need to visit Garrett one more time. I've been putting it off." Stellan looked at me. "When?" "April 2nd, I said. The date had been lodged somewhere at the back of my mind for weeks. "I'll go April 2nd. Stellan gave a slow nod. "I'll take you." "No," I said. "I have to go alone." We reached his car. I folded Lily's drawing and slipped it into my jacket pocket over my heart. There was still one more envelope I needed to send, and it wouldn't be carrying thanks. I wrote 6 words on a slip of paper. "Someone believes in you. Don't give up." I folded it into an envelope with $500 in bills and walked out into an April morning that smelled of thawed ground and something almost like possibility. April 28th, 4 months since the ambulance. Since the eats, the city had moved on without consulting me, which was exactly as it should be. I reached the Route 23 stop at Washington and Dover Streets at 7:45. Same cracked plastic shelter, same stop number painted on the signpost. 37 years I'd pulled those doors open from the other side. Now I was out here with everyone else waiting. The bus came on schedule. Red and white digital display showing 23. My chest pulled tight. Not my bus, not my route, not anymore. I boarded anyway. The driver was young, late 20s eyes that had gone flat from too many hours behind the wheel uniform shirt with a coffee stain on the sleeve. Double shift, tired. I knew that particular exhaustion the way you know your own handwriting. I tapped my card. Then, instead of heading for a seat, I set the envelope in the change tray beside his console. "Sir, what's this?" he asked. "It's for you," I said quietly, already moving toward the back. "Do I know you?" I didn't answer. I took the last row, the same seat I used to watch in my mirror when someone was causing trouble, and I waited. At the third stop corner of Washington and East Berkeley, he opened it. I watched his shoulders shift first, then his hands on the wheel began to tremble. He pressed the back of his wrist across his eyes, holding himself together, tucked the envelope into his shirt pocket, and kept driving. At the 4th stop, I stepped off through the rear door. I never learned his name, never would. That was the point. That evening, Stellan called. "Walk." We met at the Walnut Street Bridge at 7, leaning on the railing above the river. Philadelphia's lights stretched out in both directions. Somewhere on the water, a tour boat was playing music. "You gave that envelope away this morning," Stellan said. Not a question. "Route 23 driver, young, tired, how much? $500. Stellan was quiet a beat. "Your mother's note," he said. "Passed forward," I said. "That's how it works." We stood there in the comfortable kind of silence, the kind that belongs to two people who have seen each other through the worst. "I looked in on Gar yesterday." Stellan said, his voice dropping. I went still. "Only tell me if you think I need to hear it." "Not tonight," I said. Stellan nodded. "That's fair enough." The river ran below us, dark and unhurried. "Garrett came from my blood," I said after a while. "You came from a bus stop in a blizzard 30 years ago, but you're the one who held on, who documented the crimes, who operated when you had every reason to walk away, who pulled me back from the edge twice." Stellan looked at me and said nothing. "Family isn't about biology," I said. "It's about who decides to choose you back." "Family is who you die for," Stellan said quietly, "and who'd show up when you're the one dying." We stayed until the streetlights were burning full and steady in the water below. Two men in their 60s, one a retired bus driver, one a neurosurgeon with nothing obvious in common except 30 years of gratitude flowing in both directions. "You chose well, Roland," Stellan said. "So did you," I told him. "If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this, thank you. Truly, that means something to me." Looking back at everything that happened, I still can't call it a simple story about betrayal. It cost too much for that. It cost me a son in every sense that matters. It cost me the version of my life I thought I'd earned. What it gave me in return was harder to see at first, but it was real. A doctor who became a brother, a drawing from a little girl named Lily, and the quiet understanding that I believe God places certain people on your path at exactly the right moment, not by accident, but by design. Stellan was one of those people. So, in his own broken way was Garrett, because even the worst of what he did forced me to find out what I was still made of. If these father stories have taught me anything worth passing on, it's this. First, the people who know your weaknesses are not always the ones who will protect them. Choose who you trust with your vulnerabilities carefully. Second, when someone shows you who they are through their actions in a crisis, believe them not the version of them you wish existed. Third, real loyalty doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly at 3 in the morning, or in a surgical suite, or on a frozen highway. Pay attention to who actually shows up. And fourth, a dad's revenge doesn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes the most powerful thing a father can do is survive, stand up, and redirect everything that was meant to bury him into something that feeds people instead. If this story moved you, leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear that, it's not too late that the people who underestimate you may be in for a surprise. Please share this with them. Subscribe to His Hidden Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself out there.